Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back to the sleepy Virginia countryside where one very tall, very awkward man is growing up with no idea that he'll one day be plastered onto money statues and history textbooks. You've probably seen him looking stern and powdered on the dollar bill, but tonight you're not meeting that George Washington. You're stepping into the muddy boots of the real guy, the private guy, the one who worried about crop prices and toothaches more than political theory. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, because let's face it, 18th century life is one long series of ways to die slowly and uncomfortably. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your city and your local time in the comments. It's always wild seeing how far this sleepy little rabbit hole reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born on February 22nd, 1732, in a place called Pope's Creek, which sounds more charming than it is. Your home is a modest plantation in the northern neck of Virginia, an area that manages to be both beautiful and brutally mosquito-ridden. Your father, Augustine Washington, is a middling plantation owner, and your mother, Mary Ball Washington, is intense. Imagine living with someone who considers emotional restraint a competitive sport and thinks your ambition is charming but also probably dangerous. Your early years aren't glamorous. You're not born into immense wealth, but you're not destitute either. In colonial terms, you're what they call middling gentry, not quite elite, but definitely not in the fields. Still, every penny matters. When your dad dies suddenly in 1743, you're just 11. That throws your life into a blender. Your older half-brothers get most of the inheritance and your education plans hit a wall. You don't get to go to England like the super elite boys. Nope, you stay local. Your future's now in the hands of a widowed mother who is both fiercely protective and constantly skeptical of your choices. At home, you learn discipline. Mary Ball Washington runs a tight ship. She's the kind of mum who'd make you resweep the floor because she spotted one speck of dust under the bed. She doesn't remarry, which is rare, and her kids walk the line. You learn early to keep your thoughts tucked in and your ambitions quiet, at least until you're out of earshot. Even though you're not bookish in the traditional sense, you're hyper-aware of reputation. You copy out moral codes by hand as a kid, literally, dozens of rules on how to behave, speak, eat, and exist in polite society. You don't just want to blend in, you want to ascend. And to do that in colonial Virginia, you need land, connections, and respectability. You're basically on the self-made man track before it's a cliche. But let's be real, there's not a ton of glamour in your teenage years. You're too tall for your age, awkward around women, and definitely not charming in the modern sense. Picture you at a dance, silent in the corner, sweating through a heavy wool coat while trying not to trip over your own buckled shoes. You're more focused on surveying land and copying etiquette manuals than making witty conversation. Still, there's something magnetic about your seriousness, even if your peers find you a little stiff. One historical gem? As a teenager, you actually write out 110 rules of civility, stuff like, speak not evil of the absent for it is unjust, and, in company, put not your hands to any part of the body not usually discovered. It's equal parts noble and hilariously uptight, like you're prepping for a society that's mostly dinner parties and high-stakes gossip. This list isn't original, you're copying it from an old Jesuit manual, but the fact that you do it, carefully, by hand, says a lot about the version of yourself you're trying to create. And here's the quirky part. Even though you're known later for being stoic and reserved, young George, you, is actually a little hot-headed. There are stories of fiery outbursts, snapping at overseers, even getting into schoolyard-style spats. You keep a lid on it, but the temper's there, coiled tight beneath the waistcoat. Now, while your formal education ends early, your real learning begins outside. You latch on to your older half-brother Lawrence, who's married well and lives at a place called Mount Vernon. The house isn't yet the grand estate it becomes, but it's a massive step up. You idolise Lawrence, he's fought in the British military, married into a powerful family, and best of all, he sees something in you. Through him you learn the ropes, how to network, how to act around powerful people, and how to present yourself like someone who matters, even if you're still technically the poor relation crashing in the guest room. And here's where you first encounter the biggest silent player in your life. Land. Owning it, mapping it, fighting over it. This is colonial clout. You train as a surveyor in your teens, heading into the Shenandoah Valley with a compass and notepad, and a deep hope that you won't be eaten by a bear or die of dysentery, and honestly, you love it. There's something deeply satisfying about ordering the natural world, drawing boundaries, and seeing potential where others just see wilderness. You're already dreaming of your own estate, your own name carved into the map. But there's a constant undertone of vulnerability. You don't have a title, you don't have guaranteed wealth, you're tall and serious. But you're still just a kid from a middling family trying to climb a very steep ladder. And colonial Virginia is a place where status matters more than character. Though you're hoping character might one day win out, scholars still debate just how close your relationship with your mother really was. Some say she shaped your strong sense of discipline and duty. Others argue she was a cold force who left you emotionally stunted. You never speak about her with warmth. When she dies, you don't attend the funeral, blamed on political obligations, but still, ouch. Still, even in these early years, something about you stands out. You're not the most charismatic, you're not the best educated, but you are serious, intense, deliberate, like you're already aware that your life will be watched and measured, and you're determined to measure up. And so you finish your teens with a little land, a few connections, and a long list of people you need to impress. You're on your way, but you have no idea what's coming. Wars, revolutions, teeth problems, and eventually the biggest job in the Western Hemisphere. But for now, it's just you, a surveying compass, a deeply uncomfortable wig, and a growing obsession with being somebody. Your family is more complicated than a colonial soap opera, full of half-siblings, blended branches, and just enough inherited tension to make every holiday meal slightly uncomfortable. It starts with your father, Augustine Washington, who has kids from 2 marriages, meaning you're smack in the middle of a swirling household hierarchy. You're the eldest child of his second wife, Mary Ball Washington, but you've got older half-brothers, Lawrence, Augustine Jr. and Samuel from his first marriage, and that they all inherit more land, more money, and more opportunities than you do, which, stings a bit. From a young age, you learn to navigate this family dynamic like a gentleman tightrope walking across a minefield. Your half-brothers have been raised in slightly fancier circles and received a more refined education. Lawrence in particular becomes your unofficial mentor, but it's clear he's living the life you want. You admire him, maybe even envy him, and quietly shape your own identity in his shadow. Taller, quieter, more intense, but determined to prove yourself. Augustine Jr., on the other hand, is more of the inherit land and coast type. You're not super close, but you know how to play the respectful younger brother card. Now, your relationship with your full siblings, those born to Mary Ball, is more even-footed. You're closest to Betty, your sister, who's practical and patient, probably because she has to share space with so many brothers who either brood or brag. There's also John Augustine, Charles and Samuel, your younger brothers, each with their own ambitions, and each looking to you, the oldest, for a lead. You may not be the wealthiest Washington, but you're already the one they watch. And speaking of Mary Ball Washington, your mother, she's the ultimate force of nature in your life. She's widowed when you're just 11, but she doesn't flinch. She takes over the management of Ferry Farm, the family plantation, and runs it with a level of control that would make a modern CEO sweat. She's tough, pious, and unrelenting. You grow up under her watchful eye, and it's not warm. She doesn't hug, she doesn't praise, she definitely doesn't coddle. But she does expect perfection, and when you don't deliver, she lets you know you love her. Sort of. Or at least you respect her in the way a soldier respects a general who screams orders during a thunderstorm. You never speak ill of her publicly, but you also never gush about her in your letters. As you get older, you create distance, physical and emotional. You move out as soon as you can, and when she later petitions you, the President of the United States, for a military pension, you handle it with a kind of formal politeness that screams emotionally unavailable. And yet scholars still bicker about your real feelings toward her. Some say she gave you that inner steel, the ability to stay calm, silent and immovable during crises. Others argue she was the reason you became so emotionally reserved, always keeping your true thoughts locked away behind a marble expression. Maybe it's both. Maybe your greatness and your distance come from the same root. Now, let's zoom out for a second and look at how your family's status fits into the bigger picture. In colonial Virginia, everything's about land and lineage. The Washingtons aren't exactly aristocracy, but you're definitely in the gentry club. Plantation owners, slaveholders, deeply Anglican, and involved in local politics. You're expected to uphold the family name, expand its fortune, and marry well. That's the plan. That's always the plan. No one's thinking revolution yet. They're just thinking about tobacco yields and courtship rituals. And here's something quirky. The Washington family crest includes a pair of red stars and stripes, which some historians think may have inspired elements of the American flag. It's not confirmed, of course. It's one of those historical debates with just enough evidence to make it plausible, but not enough to print it in bold. Still, imagine that. Your family's coat of arms subtly bleeding into the fabric of a future nation. Your family isn't flashy. There's no European nobility in your background, no royal blood, no scandalous dramas. Okay, fewer than average, but there's something deeply American about that. You're quietly ambitious, painfully aware of appearances, and already collecting mentors like a man who knows his ladder to the top has missing rungs. One constant thread through your early private life is how calculated you are. Not in a scheming villain way, but in a very aware of your limits kind of way. You know your position is precarious. You're not the oldest son of a major land baron. You're not sent off to study law in London. You don't have automatic power or fame, so you make yourself indispensable. You learn discipline. You copy books by hand. You study the habits of gentlemen and mimic their posture. You practice silence like it's a martial art. Even as a teenager, you're already collecting virtues like badges, duty, honour, restraint. You're not particularly artistic, you're not a daydreamer, but you're excellent at knowing which mask to wear in which room. That's the kind of skill that doesn't get you invited to every party, but it does get you remembered. There's also a subtle tension in your private life between your yearning for upward mobility and the limitations of your birth. You're always trying to cross that invisible line into true elite status. Some of your letters hint at an almost painful awareness of where you stand. You're constantly towing the line between ambition and propriety. You want more, but you can't be seen as wanting too much. Even in your own family, you're sometimes treated as the workhorse, the reliable younger sibling who will ride out in the rain, deliver the message, settle the dispute. And you accept that role. You bury your feelings. You focus on your image. You're slowly crafting a life that can't be dismissed, a character that can't be ignored. And while this might sound heavy, here's where the bedtime part kicks in. Much of your private life at this stage is actually kind of boring in the best way. Farming, writing letters, practicing your penmanship, helping your mother manage accounts, surveying land in muddy boots. You're not fighting wars or dancing in ballrooms. You're just becoming. That's the quiet magic of this time. No drama, no fireworks, just the long, slow simmer of a man preparing himself for something far bigger than anyone around him can yet imagine. You're 17, and while most teenagers in the colonies are still figuring out how to hold a fork properly in polite society, you're already stomping through uncharted wilderness with a compass, a chain, and more bug bites than anyone should ever endure in a lifetime. You've just been appointed as an official surveyor in Culpeper County, which is kind of a big deal. It means you're getting paid, actual grown-up money, to walk through thick forests, crawl over mountains, and sketch out land parcels for settlers and speculators who are just as eager as you are to turn Virginia's untamed wild into tidy profit. Let's set the scene. Dense trees crowding overhead, your horse tied loosely to a branch, and a heavy leather-bound notebook clutched in your gloved hands. You pause to measure distance with a Gunter's chain, exactly 6 feet long, and record every ridge and creek with excruciating detail. Rain soaks through your stockings, your boots squelch, you're sunburned, bug-bitten, and occasionally lost. And yet somehow you're into it. You love this. There's something peaceful about imposing order on chaos, something satisfying in watching the land give up its secrets under your steady, quiet gaze. This is the first job you've ever really had, and it sets the tone for how you move through the world. You don't half do anything. You take your measurements seriously, you draw clean lines, you file neat reports. You show up when you say you will. You're not just building maps, you're building your reputation. And in a world where social climbing is more fragile than the porcelain your mother refuses to let you touch, reputation is everything. You're not working for free either. This surveyor gig pays well, at times, better than what some small landowners make in a year. That income allows you to buy your first parcels of land, and that's important because in colonial Virginia land equals power. Owning land makes you a voting man, a respected man. Not rich exactly, but no longer just another forgettable younger son. The land is your ladder, and you are already climbing. Now, let's talk about what this job is really like. It's not a glamorous profession. You don't wear powdered wigs out in the woods. You don't sip Madeira by the campfire. You're constantly battling nature. Bad weather, worse roads, wild animals, and worse companions. Some nights you're sleeping under a tarp, other nights there's no tarp. You get sick, you get cold, you get hurt. One of your colleagues loses 2 toes to frostbite. That could easily be you. But you push on because you're not just here for adventure. You're here to be seen. Every job completed, every parcel mapped, brings your name to more and more people. You work with the Fairfax family, one of the most powerful dynasties in Virginia, and you make sure they notice your precision, your punctuality, your dischargen. You never talk too much, you never act too big. You play it exactly right. The silent, reliable workhorse. And they love that. They trust you. That trust opens doors. Quirky fact, on at least one surveying trip you carry along a small collection of books, including a volume on morality and etiquette. Yes, you're roughing it in the wilderness, with one hand measuring terrain, and the other probably flipping through quotes about virtue. You're like a colonial Boy Scout with a touch of Renaissance man. It's adorably try-hard, but also weirdly effective. That duality, brutal practicality mixed with high-minded ideals, becomes a signature part of your personality. Still, even at this stage, there's tension inside you. You don't just want to measure land, you want to own it. The people hiring you are rich. You want to be them. But you can't say that out loud. Instead, you smile politely, do your work, and then go home and calculate exactly how many acres you'll need to retire in comfort. You're already dreaming of your own estate, complete with orchards, livestock, imported tiles from England, and yes, enslaved labour, which you, like every ambitious Virginian of your class, see as a dark necessity of prosperity. Now let's swing back to one of those open debates historians love to circle around. Just how much of your success was due to this surveying job? Some argue it was pivotal, your first taste of power, of independence, of managing your own name and reputation. Others think it's overblown, that plenty of young men surveyed and still ended up obscure. You definitely treat it as more than a job. You treat it like training, character boot camp for the larger roles you know are coming. And speaking of larger roles, it's during this time that your military aspirations start bubbling to the surface. You see militia officers during your trips, dressed in smart coats, issuing orders, holding a kind of respect that a dusty surveyor just can't command. You don't envy them, you plan to become one. You start corresponding with family friends who have military influence. You watch, you wait, you learn how to ask without begging, how to promote yourself without sounding arrogant. It's a delicate balance, and you're getting better at it every day. But you're also starting to realize something about Virginia society. It's built on performance. Your public life is a stage, and every conversation, every handshake, every letter is part of your script. You begin writing with more flair. You underline certain words for emphasis. You adopt a kind of measured formality that makes you sound older, wiser, more important than you are. You're not faking it, but you're definitely enhancing it. Back home, your family notices the change. You're no longer just George, the tall kid with the solemn face and awkward silences. You're becoming George Washington, the one people defer to in conversation, the one who speaks last and most carefully. Your brothers start asking your opinion on land deals. Your mother, though she'll never say it out loud, stops correcting your grammar. Even Lawrence looks at you differently now, like you've grown into something solid. The truth is, this surveying chapter isn't just about land. It's about the slow, deliberate shaping of a public identity. You don't rush it, you don't flash it. You just show up again and again until people stop asking who you are and start assuming you belong, and that's your real genius. You don't demand space, you just take it, one quiet mile at a time. You're 20 years old, tall as a scarecrow, broad-shouldered, and wearing a military coat that still smells faintly of brand new wool and ambition. At this point, you've gone from teen surveyor to rising young officer, with a commission in the Virginia militia, and you are hungry. Not for food, although you'll never say no to a slab of roasted venison, but for status. You want rank, respect, and land. Oh, and a little glory wouldn't hurt. You're done being the guy who measures other people's farms. You want to command men, lead battles, and maybe, just maybe, have your name whispered in taverns by candlelight. But you're in colonial Virginia, which means there's only one direction for ambitious men to look when it comes to military fame: west. The Ohio Valley, a lush, contested region that's less a peaceful river basin and more a pressure cooker between the British, the French, and dozens of indigenous nations who have been living there long before any empire bothered to sketch a map. You're young, inexperienced, and arguably not fully qualified, which makes you perfect for the job, because Virginia's Governor Dinwiddie needs someone willing to take a message through enemy territory, and you, with your surveyor skills and polite desperation to climb the ranks, are the perfect pick. Your mission: deliver a letter to the French at Fort LeBoeuf telling them, essentially, hey, thanks for building your fort, but this land belongs to the British now. Please leave. It's diplomacy, yes, but only in the way that asking a bear to move out of your campsite counts as diplomacy. The French politely tell you to buzz off, and you, equally politely, ride back to report. Mission accomplished, sort of. It's enough to get your name circulating. And then comes the real drama. The next spring, in 1754, you're promoted to lieutenant colonel and sent back into the Ohio wilderness, this time to secure British interests with force. What happens next will shadow you for the rest of your life. You stumble upon a French scouting party in the woods. Your men attack, and their commander, a guy named Jumonville, is killed, possibly while trying to surrender. Oops! This small chaotic skirmish sets off a chain reaction that eventually sparks the 7 Years' War, a global conflict that drags in Europe, North America, and basically every major colonial player. Historians still debate what really happened in those woods. Was Jumonville ambushed? Did you misunderstand his intentions? Did your native allies, particularly the Mingo leader Tanacharison, escalate things on purpose? The truth is murky, and honestly, it's one of the first times you get a taste of how quickly politics, war, and public perception can spiral out of your control. But here's the kicker. Even though your little wilderness encounter launches a continent-wide war, you're not exactly lauded. Shortly after, you build a slapdash stockade called Fort Necessity, because you're in desperate need of a defensible position, and end up surrendering to the French after a messy fight. The surrender document, written in French, which you do not speak, allegedly has you admitting to the assassination of Jumonville. Whether you knew what you were signing or not is still up for debate, but the French are thrilled with your accidental confession. You slink back to Virginia, your reputation bruised, your ego limping, and your dreams of swift glory now looking more like soggy paper. And yet you don't give up, because deep down, even after a diplomatic failure, a military blunder, and a linguistic mix-up that made you sound like a war criminal, you still believe you're meant for something bigger. The French and Indian War continues to churn around you, and you spend the next few years in and out of command. You're named commander of all Virginia forces, which sounds impressive until you realise you're mostly babysitting ill-trained militia, begging for supplies and arguing with the British regulars who think colonial officers like you are glorified amateurs. And yes, you deeply resent that. You want to be treated with the same respect as British officers, but the Crown has its pecking order, and you, sir, are still a colonial. Still, you hang in there. You fight, you lead, and you start to understand that war isn't just about galloping horses and waving swords. It's about logistics, politics, managing egos, and surviving swamps full of mosquitoes carrying who knows what. You learn how to lead men who are tired, hungry, and scared. You learn when to push and when to hold. You see things that mark you. Friends die, enemies betray, command proves lonely. One quirky detail from this period: you become absolutely obsessed with uniforms, specifically the ideal shade of blue for your coat. You order multiple versions, redesign insignia, and worry constantly about how your appearance reflects on your authority. It's not vanity, it's calculation. You know that soldiers respect what they see, you know that British officers judge by polish. So you make sure you look the part, even if you have to ride into town and get your coat adjusted for the 4th time that month. Despite the chaos of war, your personal life doesn't totally disappear. You start moving in higher circles, attending balls, writing long letters, and doing your best to perform the role of the respectable genteel officer. There's a rumour, still hotly debated by historians, that during this time you carry a quiet torch for Sally Fairfax, your best friend's wife. The letters between you and her are polite, but faintly smouldering. Nothing scandalous, but definitely emotionally loaded. Did anything actually happen? Probably not, but that doesn't stop future generations from reading those letters with the same intensity people read Victorian love poetry. Your private heart just slightly visible through the cracks. Eventually you resign your commission, not because you're tired of fighting, but because you're frustrated. The British Army continues to treat you like a second-class citizen. You've given your best. You've bled literally for the cause, and still you're not allowed to rise beyond a certain ceiling. So you do something quietly radical. You walk away, back to Mount Vernon, back to farming, back to the life that on paper should be enough, but never really will be. Not for you. And yet, through all the disappointment, the near-death experiences, the freezing nights in damp tents, and the bureaucratic snubs, you come away with something priceless: experience, leadership, a reputation, imperfect but growing, and most importantly, a first-hand education in just how little the British elite thinks of their American cousins. You file that bitterness away. You don't act on it yet, but one day you will. You've hung up your military coat. For now, you're 26, riding home with sore joints, a slightly dented pride, and more than a few lessons etched into your bones. The war didn't make you a legend, but it did make you something maybe even more useful: seasoned. And when you return to Mount Vernon, your half-brother Lawrence's old estate, you step into a new kind of uniform: the plantation master's waistcoat, complete with financial headaches, endless ledgers, and the occasional moment of rural peace. Mount Vernon isn't officially yours yet, but it's heading that way. Lawrence passed a few years earlier, his health worn down by tuberculosis and whatever else colonial medicine couldn't fix. You'd inherited use of the property through a complicated family arrangement, and now, with some careful manoeuvring and timely inheritance luck, it's becoming your permanent home. It's not the grand mansion it would one day be. Right now it's a decent-sized, functional house on a hill, with a view of the Potomac and just enough grandeur to make you feel like you're finally somebody. You settle in, and it's quiet. Not in the relaxing way, but in the way that makes a man stare at the river and wonder if this is it. You're still single. You've had your brushes with flirtation, maybe even longing, hello again, Sally Fairfax. But you've made no move toward marriage. You're still running calculations in your head. Marriage, land, influence, legacy. And then, just as you're deciding to focus on your estate and give up on the romance novel subplot, along comes Martha Dandridge Custis. Let's talk about that. She's a widow, wealthy, with 2 children and a vast fortune left to her by her late husband, Daniel Park Custis. You meet her during a social visit, and it's not exactly love at first sight, but it is definitely calculation meets compatibility. You're charming in your restrained, overly formal way. She's poised, intelligent, and very aware of what a new match would mean for her future, and her fortune's safety. You both do the math, and surprisingly you also seem to enjoy each other. Imagine that. So in early 1759 you marry her. No dramatic proposal, no wild passion, just a clear-eyed decision between 2 people who see the future in terms of assets and legacies. It's a good match, maybe even a great one. Martha brings with her a sizable estate, more than 100 enslaved workers, and an annual income that triples yours. You in turn bring protection, social standing, and the kind of obsessive management skills that any wealthy widow would find deeply comforting. Together, you become one of the wealthiest couples in Virginia, an instant power duo. But here's the twist. You don't just marry Martha, you marry a responsibility. Her 2 children, Jackie and Patsy, become your instant stepchildren. Jackie is a bit spoiled, full of energy, and not much interested in books. Patsy is gentle, thoughtful, and tragically ill. She suffers from epilepsy, and in an age with zero understanding of neurological conditions, that means fear, confusion, and a sense of helplessness for everyone involved. You watch over her, you write about her, you worry, and you feel that familiar frustration you always feel when something important is beyond your control. Mount Vernon becomes a hive of activity. You expand the house, you draw up plans, you obsess over the layout of your gardens, the flow of the parlour rooms, and how your guests will be impressed without you having to actually say anything. That's your vibe now, controlled elegance. You order wallpaper from England, rearrange dining chairs for maximum social effect, and send away for fancy dinnerware that arrives months later. Chipped, but still impressive. Daily life is structured, a careful ballet of chores, estate business, and managing enslaved labour. You rise early, typically around 5 a.m, and you're working by sunrise, inspecting fields, reading reports, writing letters, attending to the minutiae of plantation life. And you love the minutiae. You record weather patterns, crop rotations, and the behaviour of specific mules. You tinker with new farming techniques, obsess over how to improve soil, and experiment with different grains. If you had an 18th century YouTube channel, it would be full of slow-paced vlogs about composting and fencing. But beneath the routine hums the darker engine of the plantation economy: slavery. You now own over 100 enslaved people, including the ones inherited from Martha's first husband. You refer to them in your records as hands, servants, or by first names, often paired with numbers and work quotas. You're not outwardly cruel, but you are deeply enmeshed in a system that treats human lives as assets. You organise labour schedules, track productivity, and oversee punishments, though you often delegate that to overseers. You write stern letters about runaways. You lament in your diaries about theft or laziness, never really grasping the full inhumanity of the structure you manage so meticulously. Historians continue to debate the evolution of your views on slavery. Some argue that over time you become uncomfortable with it, writing about your desire to see it end gradually, ensuring in your will that your enslaved workers be freed upon Martha's death. Others point out that you benefited from it until your last breath, never making a public stand and rarely acknowledging the humanity of those who built your wealth. Both readings hold weight. In your private life, as in your public one, you're a man of caution, wrestling internally but rarely acting boldly unless absolutely necessary. Still, life at Mount Vernon in this period is oddly quiet. You're not yet the father of his country, you're not yet the statue, you're just a wealthy planter, navigating the social world of Virginia gentry, riding to local court sessions, attending balls, writing long-winded letters about corn and horses. You host guests constantly, sometimes for days or even weeks at a time, because hospitality is not just custom, it's currency. You're admired for your table settings, your wine selection, and your ability to remain stoic during awkward silences. That too is a skill. You're respected, you're steady, and you're content in that very specific way that comes when a man has worked his way up and now owns the view from his own porch. You've stopped reaching for military glory. You've found a rhythm, and maybe, just maybe, you're starting to believe that your life will play out here, one season at a time, on the banks of the Potomac in the company of family, dinner guests, and those quiet, relentless plantation ledgers. But the thing about quiet chapters is they never last. You don't fall in love easily, not with people, not with poetry, not with public speaking, but there's one thing that always gets your pulse up just a little: rank. You crave it the way other people crave warm bread or scandalous gossip. You want titles, you want prestige, you want to sit at the head of the table without needing to announce that you deserve to be there. And so, with your marriage settled, your plantation humming, and your social standing nicely burnished, you begin quietly campaigning for the next thing. Power. Not revolution, not yet. Just the kind of colonial clout that gets your name spoken in better rooms. And the next room you walk into? The House of Burgesses. It's the colonial version of a legislature, filled with powdered wigs, heavy wooden chairs, and the clink of snuff boxes being opened with theatrical flair. You're elected in 1758, not a hard sell, given your military service and land holdings, and suddenly you're surrounded by the Virginia's most ambitious men. The sessions are slow, procedural, and frequently interrupted by grandstanding, but you sit through them all with the same grim determination you used to apply to wilderness marching. You don't speak often. That's your thing now, strategic silence. Let others burn their energy on speeches and arguments. You observe, you take notes, you learn how the colonial power game is played, how landowners, lawyers, and merchants all elbow for position without ever raising their voices. It's a performance, really, and you study it the way you used to study battlefield maps. Back at Mount Vernon, your private life continues in its carefully manicured rhythm. You and Martha throw dinners that are polite, respectable, and just a little stiff. You host fellow burgesses, military friends, visiting family. The parlour becomes your court. You rarely drink to excess, but you always have wine on hand. You don't gamble much, but you make sure guests are offered cards. You don't flirt, but you're just courtly enough to keep every woman in the room from thinking you're entirely made of stone. One strange little fact: during these years you keep a cash account ledger where you record every transaction with obsessive detail. And not just the usual plantation expenses, also things like buttons, ribbon, shoe buckles, and the exact price of a wig comb. You're managing your image down to the penny. You want to be respected as a gentleman, and that means being impeccably dressed, properly equipped, and always on time. You're not flashy, but you are precise. The precision becomes your armour. You start spending more time on appearances, not just your wardrobe, but your literal presence in the colony's social calendar. You attend horse races, balls, assemblies, and court sessions. You don't dominate any room, but you're always there, tall and quiet in the corner, with people gradually shifting their conversations to include you. You're not the kind of man people celebrate. You're the kind they defer to without quite knowing why. Meanwhile, your household becomes more complex. Martha's children, Jackie and Patsy, are growing up and you're playing the role of father, not biologically, but functionally. Jackie is proving to be a handful. He's charming but lazy, more interested in fine coats than books, and you're already writing slightly exasperated letters about his inability to focus. Patsy, on the other hand, remains fragile. Her epilepsy worsens. The family calls in doctors, clergy, even quack remedies, but nothing really helps. Her seizures are unpredictable, and you, used to controlling everything from fence posts to furniture arrangements, are helpless to stop them. Your role as stepfather isn't flashy, but it's steady. You show up, you write letters, you make plans for their futures. You try to shape them with structure and affection, though your affection tends to come out more as careful planning than warmth. Still, in your own quiet way, you care. Deeply. When Patsy dies suddenly in 1773, seized, collapsed, gone in minutes, you're gutted. You write only a few words in your diary, Patsy Custis died. That's it. No flourish, no sentiment. But behind those 3 clipped words is a man staring at something he can't fix. That tight control you've built your life around. It's cracked. You throw yourself deeper into work. The plantation expands. You experiment with new crops, wheat instead of tobacco, which is both a practical choice and a slow nod to the fact that the British trade system isn't working like it used to. You write letters to English merchants, complaining about damaged shipments and overcharging. You track rainfall. You rotate fields. You draft long instructions to overseers. You're not just running Mount Vernon, you are Mount Vernon. Every detail has your fingerprint on it, from garden paths to the breed of pigs in the sty. And then there's the social unrest beginning to smoulder. You're not a radical, not yet, but you're paying attention. The British keep passing new taxes, the colonies keep grumbling louder. You host guests who rant about Parliament, about unfair trade laws, about soldiers in the streets of Boston. You don't join the shouting, but you're listening. You're always listening. Scholars still debate how early your revolutionary leanings begin. Some say it's practical, you're tired of British snubs of the way they treat colonials like second-class citizens. Others argue it's about economics, taxes, trade restrictions, all the things hurting your plantation business. But maybe in your private life it's something simpler. Maybe you've spent enough time being underestimated, managed by a distant authority, told what you can't do. And slowly, very slowly, the idea takes root. Maybe the colonies don't need Britain. Maybe you don't need Britain. Still, for now, your daily life is mostly unchanged. You're still riding your property at St. Dawn, still inspecting fences, still scolding Jackie through carefully worded letters, still inviting judges and generals to dinner and making sure the Madeira is just the right temperature. You live in layers, polished on the surface, restless underneath. Your reputation grows. You're invited to join the Virginia elite in planning how to respond to British policies. You're not the loudest voice in the room, but when you speak, people listen. You're careful, measured, and always aware of how your words will be remembered. You're becoming a man people trust with power, not because you chase it, but because you don't. And in the quiet moments, when the guests are gone and the candles have burned low, you sometimes walk alone along the Potomac. Just you, the water, and your thoughts. You don't say them out loud, not yet. But the world is changing. You can feel it, even in the wind. It's a warm spring morning in 1758, and you're back on the road, coat freshly brushed, boots polished, and every inch of your appearance carefully engineered to project competence and calm authority. But this trip isn't for war or politics. This one's personal. You're riding to the home of Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 small children, and you're not entirely sure what kind of man you need to be when you get there. Dashing, gentle, financially literate. Probably all of the above, because this is courtship in 18th century Virginia, and it's less rom-com meet-cute and more interview for a lifetime joint business venture. Martha's already well known in elite circles. She's tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but commands a room with that serene steeliness you'll come to rely on later. She was married young to Daniel Park Custis, a man nearly twice her age who left her a widow at 26 with enormous land holdings, a mountain of inherited wealth, and 2 children, Jackie and Pastisi. She doesn't need a husband, but she may want one, and more importantly, she wants a protector, someone who can manage the massive tangle of business affairs left behind, fend off suitors, and raise her children without drama. You're not the richest man in Virginia, but you're respectable, orderly, and have a clean military record. That's more attractive than a love poem. The story goes that your visit to her estate, White House Plantation, is brief. You arrive, you talk, you charm with that polite, reserved intensity of yours, and by the next day you're writing letters to friends that strongly suggest you've made up your mind. No drawn-out flirting, no prolonged suspense. You propose, she accepts, the match is made. The wedding takes place in early 1759 at her estate. You wear a blue suit with silver trim, probably sweating through it because Virginia in January doesn't always cooperate, and colonial churches aren't known for their central heating. Martha's in silk and pearls. There are guests, toasts, and food, of course. Lots of food. And then the two of you begin your ride back to Mount Vernon with carriages full of furniture, silver, and one very important detail: a new identity. Because from the moment you marry Martha, your private life transforms. You're no longer just George Washington, veteran and aspiring land baron. Now you're also the manager of the Custis estate, the stepfather to 2 children, and the co-owner of one of the largest enslaved workforces in Virginia. You double your holdings practically overnight. You're no longer trying to claw your way into the gentry. You are the gentry. And Martha, she adapts quickly to life at Mount Vernon. She brings with her refinement, influence, and an enormous collection of tea sets. She's not overly affectionate, at least not in public, but she's steady and deeply practical, someone who knows how to run a household of 300 people and not lose sleep over spilled ink or storm-damaged tobacco barns. She manages the domestic sphere while you obsess over crops, infrastructure, and how to angle the dining room windows for maximum dramatic effect. It's a partnership based on shared ambition, mutual respect, and just enough emotional compatibility to keep things warm without ever boiling over. Now, let's talk about those kids. Patsy is delicate, sweet, and sickly. Her seizures come without warning and shake the entire household. You watch helplessly as she declines. You call in doctors, you write anxious letters, you research remedies, but nothing really works. You grow protective, possibly overbearing, and definitely more emotionally invested than you ever admit out loud. Jackie, meanwhile, is the opposite. Loud, spoiled, entitled. You try to mould him. You write him letters filled with advice, lots of it. Read more, ride less, study Latin, focus. But Jackie's not built like you. He prefers leisure to responsibility. You fume privately, but you keep trying, because that's what you do. You try to fix what can be managed and compartmentalise what can't. Still, life at Mount Vernon isn't all discipline and parenting lectures. There's a social rhythm to plantation life. And now that you and Martha are a proper power couple, guests start arriving in droves. Some stay a day, some a week, some so long you wonder if they've moved in permanently. You host generals, lawyers, visiting relatives, clergy. Your guest book becomes a who's who of Virginia's rising elite. You serve wine from Portugal, beer brewed on site, and always tea, imported, expensive, and poured with ceremony. Every detail is designed to send a message. We are respectable, we are civilized, we are in control, and then there's the house itself. Mount Vernon is constantly under renovation. You obsess over symmetry, light, and airflow. You redesign the portico, expand the wings, and start collecting paint samples like a modern DIYer in denial. It's not just about comfort, it's about legacy. You want this house to reflect your ideals: order, clarity, permanence. The gardens, too, are part of this vision. You install boxwood hedges in neat patterns, exotic plants in labelled rows, and an ice house for preserving meat, because nothing says prestige like cold beef in July. But underneath the manicured surface, your estate is built on enslaved labour. Hundreds of men, women, and children forced to serve, harvest, cook, and build. You keep detailed records of their work schedules, clothing rations, and punishments. You refer to them in your ledgers the same way you refer to tools or livestock. And while you rarely oversee punishments personally, you authorise them. You write about runaways as property losses. You separate families when you must. You know this system is cruel, but you also rely on it, heavily. What's strange is that you start to show signs, quiet, tentative signs, that you're uncomfortable with the whole institution. You write privately about the moral problem of slavery. You express interest in gradual emancipation. You avoid selling enslaved people even when your finances wobble. But you never say any of this out loud, not publicly, not yet. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's calculation. Maybe you still don't know where you land. But the contradiction is baked into your daily life. building a democratic ideal on the backs of those who have no freedom at all. Meanwhile, Martha runs her part of the household with cool efficiency. She handles visitors, supervises the enslaved domestic workers, oversees the clothing production, and manages her children's education. She writes letters full of updates, trades recipes, and never lets a teacup go missing. She's not flashy, but her presence is felt into every room. Some historians argue she was the quiet architect of your social ascent. You never say it outright, but the respect is there, in your actions, in your reliance on her judgment, in the long years of quiet partnership that follow. Privately, you seem, if not content, then at least anchored. You've got wealth, reputation, a family, and a home to grow old in. You're not chasing war, you're not dreaming of revolutions. You're pruning fruit trees and inspecting roof shingles. You ride your estate in long loops, observing workers, adjusting plans, and occasionally stopping to let your horse drink while you stare out over the Potomac, wondering if this quiet, ordered life is what it was all building toward. But history has a habit of knocking politely before it kicks down the door. And somewhere, just over the horizon, a storm is gathering. There's a strange rhythm to life at Mount Vernon now. You wake early, not because you have to, but because it's habit. The kind of discipline that sticks like a well-worn pair of boots. You roll out of bed before dawn, often without lighting a candle, and sit in the faint grey light at your desk, quill in hand, already halfway through a letter before the house fully stirs. Outside, the enslaved workers are already beginning their day, trudging across dew-soaked grass toward 4 fields that seem to stretch forever. You glance out the window at them, not coldly, but not quite seeing them either. They're part of the estate's rhythm, and rhythm to you is everything. Life here is almost theatrical in its structure. The morning brings estate matters, crop reports, livestock inventories, letters from overseers. The afternoons are for inspection rides, checking in on everything from the wheat fields to the smokehouse. In the evenings, if there are no guests, you read or write, but there are almost always guests. Travellers, neighbours, curious politicians, visiting relatives. They arrive dusty, tired and hopeful. Some stay too long. You entertain them with polite smiles and well-rehearsed stories that reveal just enough of your past to impress, without giving away too much of the man behind the posture. Inside the house, everything is in its place. You've designed the rooms not just for comfort, but for effect. The parlour chairs are angled just so for conversation. The windows are placed to catch the most flattering light. You've even calculated how long a walk from the front door to the dining room should take, assuming an average guest walks at a certain pace. You are, by all definitions, a man obsessed with order. And yet, despite your perfectly tuned world, tension is starting to creep in. Not just in the colonies, where the mood is turning from grumble to growl, but in your bones. You feel it at night, restlessness, the sense that you were built for something more than estate ledgers and crop yields. But you say nothing. You just ride longer, write more, and scan the papers for news out of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. One letter in particular shakes you. It's from a friend, another Virginia planter, furious about the Stamp Act. He writes about unfair taxes, about colonial merchants being strangled by Parliament. You don't reply right away. You reread the letter. You fold it neatly and place it in a drawer. But your mind won't let it go. You know what he's saying is true. You've seen it in your own dealings. British merchants treating you like a second-class customer, overcharging you, delaying shipments, responding with condescending indifference. And you're tired of it. You start to keep closer tabs on the British government's latest moves. Every new law, every new tax lands like a pebble in your shoe, small, annoying, impossible to ignore. The Townshend Acts, the Tea Act. You're not out in the streets with torches, but you're not drinking British tea anymore either. You're quietly boycotting, choosing American goods when you can, making sure your guests see it, even if you don't say it. In public, you remain composed. You attend meetings of the House of Burgesses. You nod thoughtfully. You speak rarely, but when you do, your words are weighty. People begin to notice you're not the fiery type. You're the steady hand, the calm centre. And suddenly, in a time of rising panic, that becomes more valuable than any speech. One quirky detail about this era. You begin to receive more and more letters from strangers asking for advice, recommendations, even whole life wisdom. One man writes asking how to become a gentleman. Another wants help securing a commission. You write back carefully, as if each letter might someday be studied. You choose your words with agonizing precision. as if the wrong adjective might cost you something. You're building a brand slowly, quietly. George Washington, the Honourable Virginian. You never call it that, of course, but you know exactly what you're doing. Meanwhile, your household grows more complex. Jackie is older now, still disinterested in books, but full of charm and promise, if promise meant fancy waistcoats and a slight gambling problem. You try to steer him. You fail. You send him to King's College, which will one day be Columbia University, hoping it'll give him some name structure. It does not. He drops out and returns to Virginia, ready to coast on the family name. You're disappointed, deeply, but you don't press. You just sigh, write him another letter about duty, and go check on the barn roof. Martha watches all this with her usual quiet. She doesn't scold Jackie. She knows he's not you. No one is. She spends more time in the domestic sphere, managing servants, organising linens, writing letters. Sometimes she sews, sometimes she plays cards. She is in her own way adapting to this new version of life, wealthy, complicated, poor, and full of guests who keep bringing up politics over dinner. You both feel the ground shifting beneath the polished floors. Your mail becomes more political. Men like Patrick Henry and George Mason write to you. They ask where you stand, you don't commit. Not publicly, not yet. You read their letters by candlelight, pen poised, and then put them aside. You're not afraid, you're just not impulsive. You know what war really is. You've seen it, tasted it, watched it unravel the proud and the unprepared. You're not going to step into another conflict without being sure, absolutely sure, but the world isn't going to wait for you. The Boston Massacre happens, the Tea Party, the intolerable acts. Suddenly, even the most loyal colonists are wondering if it's time to break free. In Virginia, committees of correspondence form. Private letters take on revolutionary tones. You attend meetings, speak in measured terms, and quietly begin organising militia units. Not loudly, but methodically, like a man sharpening tools he swore he'd never use again. Scholars debate whether you truly wanted independence at this point. Some say you were still hoping for reconciliation. Others argue you were quietly preparing for the break from the start. Maybe it's both. Maybe you were waiting to see if the British would blink first. But they don't. And each time they double down, your decision becomes clearer. Still, back at Mount Vernon, your days continue like clockwork. You ride the estate's perimeter. You inspect the new smokehouse. You note the birth of piglets in your diary. You comment on the weather. You sketch plans for a new barn, and all while a revolution simmers just beyond your garden wall. It's the calm before the storm, and you, tall, reserved, orderly, are already bracing yourself for what's next. You're up before the sun again. You always are. It's 1774, and the birds are just starting to stir in the trees outside your bedroom window at Mount Vernon. But you've already got your boots on and your mind locked on the day ahead. The estate is moving like a great creaking machine. The enslaved workers are trudging toward the fields, the kitchen staff is starting the fires, and the housemaids are sweeping corridors that haven't even seen footprints yet. You nod to one or two servants as you pass them in the hallway, your face unreadable. You're not unfriendly, but you're not approachable either. You've got that practiced stillness about you, like a marble statue that just happens to be alive. On your desk, the day's mail waits. It's thicker than usual. You break the seals slowly, one by one, scanning each letter. Most are political now, some openly rebellious, others still clinging to the hope of royal compromise. But they're all pulsing with the same energy. Change is coming, and it's coming fast. You're in your early 40s now, your hair starting to grey slightly at the temples, though it'll be hidden under that powdered wig, and you're respected far and wide as a level-headed man of wealth, war experience, and unshakable self-discipline. You're not flashy, you're not poetic, and you'll never be the guy shouting at a podium with a clenched fist. But people listen to you, that's power, and the people who know you best, George Mason, Patrick Henry Saul, Peyton Randolph, they're all quietly checking your temperature to see how revolutionary you're feeling. You don't jump, that's not your skill. But you do start leaning. You host dinners where talk of British tyranny flows more freely than the Madeira. You write cautiously worded letters supporting colonial rights. And when Virginia starts organising resistance efforts, you join in. Not with fire and fury, but with calm readiness, like a man sharpening his tools just in case. One odd little fact from this time. You start saving newspaper clippings, like a lot of them. You cut out political commentary, parliamentary debates, editorials from colonial printers. You file them away carefully, often folding them with a straight edge. It's not just information gathering, it's control. You want to know everything before you commit to anything. Your house becomes a quiet archive of tension, one drawer full of indigo seed orders, the next full of protests against the coercive acts. And then comes the letter that really changes the tempo, an invitation to be part of the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It's not a military command, it's not flashy, but it's political, big political. You pack your trunks, press your best coat and ride north. Philadelphia in 1774 is a world of wigs, waistcoats and whispered deals in shadowy taverns. You arrive and instantly feel out of place, not because you're not welcome, but because you're still a man of the soil, used to fields and timber and riding 10 miles before breakfast. Here in the city everything smells like ink and smoke and political urgency. You speak little, but your presence says enough. People see your height, your military poise, your silences, and assume you're weighing the Republic in your head. Truthfully, you're just trying not to roll your eyes at the more theatrical delegates. You listen, you take notes, you attend every meeting, and when the question of armed resistance comes up, you don't say much, but you do show up to dinner wearing your old military uniform. It's subtle, it's symbolic, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Back at Mount Vernon, things are shifting too. You've started reorganising your estate for wartime conditions. You begin producing more food, fewer luxury crops. You draft lists of your property's inventory, tools, horses, wagons, calculating how they might be used in an armed conflict. Your letters hint at uncertainty but also readiness. It's like watching a man slowly dismantle a life of order to prepare for a season of chaos. And amid all this political motion, there's the constant backdrop, the enslaved labourers. Their work continues uninterrupted. Fields must still be ploughed, livestock fed, wool spun. You depend on them more than ever, yet you're also growing uneasy. You're seeing contradictions you never had to confront before. You're fighting for liberty in theory while denying it in practice. You start quietly allowing some of your enslaved workers to buy their freedom, an uncommon move for the time, but you don't go public with it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Historians debate whether this is conscience or image control, maybe both, but it's clear that something's shifting inside you. Slavery no longer fits cleanly into the vision you have for America, or for yourself. But you also know it's part of the foundation your life stands on. That kind of contradiction doesn't go away, it just gets buried deeper. Back in Philadelphia, tensions ratchet up. The Congress sends petitions to the king, they plan boycotts, they exchange letters by candlelight, written in coded phrases like, "Firm measures must be taken," or "Our liberties must be preserved." You keep mostly quiet, but when it's time to vote, you're never absent. And then the powder keg explodes. April 1775, Lexington and Concord. British soldiers march, colonial militias fight back, shots are fired, people die. Suddenly it's not politics anymore, it's war. You ride home to Mount Vernon quickly, the fields look the same, the trees are in bloom, but everything feels different. Martha sees it too. She doesn't say much, she rarely does, but she starts packing things. Quietly, methodically. She knows you won't be staying here much longer. Then in June, the Second Continental Congress meets again. The colonies are asking a terrifying question. Who will lead our army? The answer is whispered before it's spoken aloud. You stand tall, stoic, still quiet. But this time your silence has a gravity to it. Everyone knows you're the one they want. You don't campaign, you don't plead, but you do accept. You walk home to your lodgings that night with the weight of 13 colonies on your shoulders. Your world, the quiet, structured, deeply private world you built, is dissolving. Mount Vernon will carry on without you. Martha will manage what she can, but you're going to war. Again. You accept the command without drama. Of course you do. There's no grand speech, no emotional declaration, just a short statement to Congress in your usual clipped, courteous tone. You say you're honoured, humbled, unworthy of the role. Inside, though, you know this is the moment everything's been pointing toward. All the years of restraint, of quiet ambition, of building yourself into a man people could trust. You're not surprised they chose you. You're just wondering how long it'll take before they regret it. Because here's the thing no one talks about when they hand you a Continental Army. It barely exists. It's a loose collection of ragtag militias, some wearing hunting jackets, some showing up barefoot, many carrying their own farming tools in place of proper weapons, no standard uniforms, no centralised supplies, no reliable pay. and now it's your job to shape them into something that can hold the line against the most powerful military on Earth. Good luck. You set out for Boston in mid-June 1775, just days after the Battle of Bunker Hill. The roads are hot, dusty, and thick with gossip. Everywhere you stop, people stare. Some offer blessing, some offer advice. A few just want to see the man they've been hearing about, this tall, silent Virginian who supposedly exudes command just by standing still. You travel on horseback, of course, and behind you trails a caravan of trunks, maps, ledgers, and more powdered wigs than anyone probably needs in a war zone. When you finally arrive at the makeshift encampment outside Boston, it's exactly as chaotic as you feared. Soldiers camped under trees, horses tied to fence posts. Men cooking over open fires with the same knives they used in battle. The smell of unwashed bodies, scorched earth, and too many latrines in too small a space. You don't flinch, you dismount, walk among them, and begin asking questions. Not loudly, just steadily, one commander at a time. Here's where your private life gets all tangled up in the war. You try to keep your family out of it, but war doesn't make room for walls. You write to Martha almost daily. Your letters are stiff on the surface, mostly logistics, reports, and polite concern, but there are cracks in the veneer. You tell her you miss home, that you hope she's well, that she shouldn't worry. She worries anyway. She's a wife, not a statue. And after months of waiting, she finally joins you in the winter camp near Boston, bringing a semblance of domesticity to a world full of bayonets and broken boots. Martha's presence changes the tone. Officers begin bringing their wives. Dinners become a little more civilized. There's even a ball. You still attend meetings all day, read correspondence late into the night, and ride out to inspect troops at sunrise. But for a few hours in the evening there's warmth, laughter, cards, sometimes even dancing. You don't dance much, you never really have. But you watch from the corner, nodding, sipping wine, and letting yourself believe, just for a minute, that things might work out. But they don't. Not yet. Supplies are always short. Morale flickers like a dying candle. Your men are often hungry, sick, or both. Some desert, others mutiny. You never yell, you never panic. Instead, you enforce order with a kind of quiet dread. You issue general orders with precise language, designed to inspire or terrify depending on who's reading. You hang a few deserters, you publicly praise bravery, you ride your horse through camp daily, a tall, silent figure who doesn't say much but sees everything. And about those horses, you go through quite a few, not because you're careless, but because war is hard on animals. You name them with grim practicality. Nelson, Blueskin, Magnolia. They carry you across icy rivers and through enemy fire. You speak to them gently, pat their necks, and always make sure they're fed before you are. It's one of your few softsmen, and your men notice. There's a fringe story that floats around, half gossip, half ghost tale, that you survived multiple battles without ever being hit, even with bullets passing through your coat. Native allies reportedly call you the man who cannot be killed. You don't comment on this. Of course you don't. You just nod, tighten your gloves, and ride on. As the siege of Boston drags on, you keep waiting for something to break. Then, in March 1776, it does. You sneak cannon onto the high ground of Dorchester Heights, under cover of darkness, a trick worthy of theatre. The British wake to find themselves outmanoeuvred, and rather than fight, they retreat. You've won your first major victory without a pitched battle. It's not flashy, it's not cinematic, but it's effective, and the city of Boston is yours. You don't gloat. You write a restrained dispatch to Congress, thank your officers, and prepare for the next move. The war is only just beginning. You're painfully aware of that. And here's the thing about your private life during war. It doesn't go away. It just follows you like a shadow, whispering through your letters, your headaches, your sleepless nights. You still write home about Mount Vernon, asking about the wheat, the orchards, the new shingles on the south wing. You still ask about Jackie, who's now older and possibly even more spoiled than before. You still worry about Martha, who's adapting to this travelling wife role with surprising grace. And then there's the reality you can't ignore, the enslaved people back home. While you're fighting for liberty, they're still working the fields, still serving in your house, still waiting for a freedom that doesn't include them. You know it. You don't write about it much. But you know it lives at the edges of your thoughts, especially when you see black soldiers fighting in northern regiments, wearing the same tattered uniforms as their white comrades, bleeding for a cause they may never fully benefit from. Privately, you begin to shift. Slowly, quietly, you begin questioning the system you've profited from. You don't say it publicly, you don't even write it outright. But the war, this grinding, endless war, starts eroding the certainty you once had about the way the world works. You become thinner, your hair greys faster, you suffer chronic tooth pain, your dentures creak and pinch, especially in the cold. You rarely smile, but your letters are still precise, your posture is still perfect, and your resolve? It's harder than ever. This isn't the glorious war you imagined in your 20s. It's colder, dirtier, more complicated, but you lead anyway. Because now, it's not just about reputation or legacy, it's about keeping something fragile from shattering entirely. You didn't choose this war, but you'll finish it. You're supposed to be winning by now, or at least holding your ground. Instead, it's the autumn of 1776, and everything is falling apart. Fast. You've just been driven out of New York by the British, who landed on Long Island with the kind of precision and force that only the most well-funded army in the world can manage. Your troops, scattered, barefoot, some armed with muskets that wouldn't fire in a drizzle, many without coats as winter starts to dig in its heels. You try not to show it, but privately you know, this is the low point. And if things keep going this way, your revolution is over before the snow melts. You write letters constantly now, pages upon pages. Your quill never dry for long. To Congress, pleading for reinforcements, supplies, money, to governors, begging for local militia. To Martha, soft but sparse words, apologies for the silence, assurances you're fine even when you're not. You sleep in tents more often than beds. You eat what the men eat. Boiled meat, hard bread, sometimes nothing at all. Your coat is worn at the elbows, your gloves have holes, but you still keep your posture, your silence, and your uncanny ability to look more in control than you feel. Morale is sinking like a stone. Enlistments are expiring. Men are deserting in droves, trudging back to their farms and families with frostbitten feet and no faith left. One night you ride the camp perimeter for hours, just to see who's still awake, who's still here. You say little, just nod at the sentries, sometimes pausing to check on a campfire. Your presence is your strategy. If they see you unbroken, maybe they'll stay. And then, as the year ends and the army is barely clinging to life on the banks of the Delaware River, you take a gamble, not a tactical one, a desperate one. You gather the last of your forces, 2,400 ragged men, and prepare to cross the icy river in the dead of night during a snowstorm on Christmas. Why? Because the British don't expect it. Because you need a win. Because your men need to believe again. The crossing is brutal. Ice chunks scrape the sides of the boats. Snow blinds you. Wind cuts through your coat and gnaws at your bones. Men slip, stumble, nearly drown. But you keep going. Quietly, grimly, you cross, march 9 miles in the snow, and descend on the unsuspecting Hessian garrison at Trenton like a storm given human form. The victory is swift and complete. You take nearly 1,000 prisoners. You don't lose a single man in battle. The news spreads like wildfire. And suddenly, you're back. The image of you standing tall on the riverbank, cloaked and stoic, becomes legend. Embellished in paintings, exaggerated in poems, but based on something real. You didn't flinch when the cause seemed lost, and that, more than strategy or strength, is what people remember. That you stayed upright. This becomes your private war rhythm. Desperation, grit, surprise. You learn to fight not just battles, but time itself. You harass the British, pick off supply lines, retreat when needed, strike when least expected. You don't win often, but when you do, it matters. Morale returns in small doses, like sips of water after a long thirst. But even as you become the face of resistance, your personal world remains strangely small. You don't confide in many. You trust very few. Your officers call you His Excellency, and even the ones who like you know better than to get too casual. You write daily in a tidy, slanted hand, you monitor inventory, you still care deeply about uniforms. More than a few letters are devoted to hat styles, coat colours, and the exact placement of epaulettes. Not because you're vain, but because image still matters. A shabby army is a weak army, and weak armies die. Your health suffers, the toothaches are worse. You rely more on those miserable wooden dentures, which make your jaw sore and your speech slightly muffled. You develop frequent fevers, chest congestion, and possibly mild depression. Not that anyone would call it that in your century. You just grow quieter, even for you. You miss Mount Vernon. You write to your estate manager for updates. How's the wheat yield? Are the hogs healthy? Has the new garden wall been completed? You still care about the house, its lines, its angles, the orchards, but you know it's not really yours right now. It belongs to the weir. You miss Martha. She writes regularly, her tone brisk but affectionate, full of updates about Jackie and the household. When she comes to camp again, it's like someone brings warmth into a freezing room. She tends to the sick, organises social gatherings, and serves tea in tents with a grace that stuns hardened officers. You don't say it, but you need her presence like fire needs oxygen. And then tragedy. Jackie, your stepson, enlists late in the war, possibly to impress you, or at least not to disappoint you any further. He catches camp fever after the siege of Yorktown. He dies within weeks. You don't show it, not in public, but it breaks something in you. Not because you had the perfect relationship, but because he was still yours, in a way. And you'd always thought you'd have time to fix him, to shape him, do you mean? But time, you're reminded again and again, doesn't listen to plans. The war drags on. Even after victories you stay cautious. You've seen too much to celebrate too soon. You keep the pressure on. You manage jealousy, politics, traitors. Benedict Arnold flips sides. Congress underfunds your army. Officers grumble about back pay, you mediate and you scold, you soothe, and when your men are starving and barefoot at Valley Forge, you share their misery, riding through snow, eating cold rations, refusing any comforts they don't have. You endure. That becomes your legacy more than any battlefield. You endure. And here's the odd thing, this life of hardship, separation, filth, and endless responsibility becomes a kind of home for you. You don't love it, but you know how to survive in it. The quiet moments, the long nights staring into a flickering candle, the solitary rides at dawn, they're not so different from the life you lived before the war. Just colder, just lonelier. People expect rage, fury, vengeance. You give them stillness. They expect flair. You give them consistency. Your gift isn't brilliance, it's the slow, grinding gravity of someone who refuses to give up. And that, more than strategy or speeches or swordplay, keeps the cause alive. You don't know when this war will end, but you're not thinking about that right now. You're thinking about tomorrow's route, the next supply shipment, the letter you need to write before sunrise. And if only for a second you think about home, about Mount Vernon, about the chair in your study, the rustle of orchard leaves, the quiet hum of the Potomac. But then the candle sputters, and it's back to orders, numbers, maps. The Republic isn't built yet, and you still have work to do. There's a version of war people romanticize, the trumpets, the flags, the galloping into history. And then there's the one you actually live, a war of mud, lice, smoke, and bureaucracy. It's 1778 now. You're not the Green Commander of a few years ago. Your posture's the same, your voice still low and deliberate, but the lines around your eyes are deeper. Your coat is heavier on your shoulders. The long war has aged you, not just in your face, but in how you move, how you write, how you feel when the sun rises and you have to face another day of commanding men who haven't been paid, haven't been fed, and still expect miracles. You're stationed at Valley Forge through the brutal winter of 778. It's cold in a way that feels like punishment. Temperatures drop below freezing and snow seems to fall just to spite you. Tents sag under the weight. Firewood is scarce. Your men are sick, half naked, wrapped in scraps of blankets, sleeping on frozen ground. Disease spreads like spilled ink across a page. You lose hundreds. Dysentery, smallpox, starvation. Each morning the roll call feels shorter. You don't complain, but you feel it. Every time you walk the camp, every time you write another death report or order another ration that never arrives, it chips away at something inside you. The men watch you closely. You're their weather vane. If you break, they break. So you don't break. You keep walking, you inspect, correct, encourage. And in your nightly reports you note every detail, cleanliness, discipline, number of shoes, firewood supplies, because the only way to survive this war is to control what you can and pray the rest doesn't kill you. Then, like some awkward, frostbitten angel, arrives Baron von Steuben. He's a Prussian officer who doesn't speak much English, travels with an Italian greyhound, and might be bluffing about parts of his military resume. But you don't care. He knows how to drill an army, and drill he does. From morning until dusk he barks orders through translators, corrects posture, slaps muskets out of hands, and teaches these ragged volunteers how to stand like soldiers. You support him fully. You watch, occasionally stepping in to clarify, always keeping a careful distance. You don't scream at your men. That's not your style. You lead with presence, with silence, with the heavy, quiet weight of expectation. And slowly, the army changes. Line by line, company by company, they learn. You watch formations tighten. You see musket drills sharpen. It's not dramatic, but it's transformation, and it's happening in the middle of suffering. One of the stranger rituals you pick up during this time is your obsession with letters. You write dozens, sometimes in a single day. To Congress, to state governors, to generals, to Martha. You dictate at a pace that exhausts your secretaries. You write about supplies, horses, munitions, fencing, inoculation, breaches, and sometimes briefly, your feelings. Not many, not often, but enough to let her know you're still there beneath the uniform. Martha joins you again that winter. She arrives in a carriage that nearly gets stuck in the snow. She brings with her warmth, comfort, and a reminder of the world outside this frostbitten nightmare. She organises the women's efforts in camp, sewing, nursing, even socialising. She wears gowns slightly too fine for the setting, which makes her presence feel like defiance. She's unshakable, and she understands you in a way no one else does. She sees you when you're not looking, and though neither of you says much about it, her presence helps you keep going. You host small dinners, you attend a few dances. There's even an amateur play performed by the officers, light comedy with bad wigs and worse accents. You sit through it patiently, managing a tight-lipped smile. Everyone's trying to forget, even for an hour, the brutal truth outside the tent flaps. And yet, amidst the frost and fatigue, something happens that changes everything. The French join the war. After the American victory at Saratoga, Benjamin Franklin, ever the charming operator, convinces Louis XVI that this little colonial rebellion is worth backing. France officially enters the war in early 1778, bringing with it ships, troops, and much-needed legitimacy. It's like discovering a crack of sunlight after months underground. Hope doesn't return in a flood, it trickles in, but it's enough. Privately, you're relieved. Publicly, you remain measured. You issue formal letters, organise new supply lines, and prepare for the next campaign. You know the British aren't going to roll over just because France is involved. If anything, they'll dig in deeper. But at least now you have allies, and ships, and best of all, a glimmer of actual strategy. One quirky little thing about you during this time? You start signing your letters with more flair. Just slightly. G. Washington becomes tighter, more compact, like your own personality is sneaking into the ink. Your handwriting stays neat, always, but there's an edge to it, a confidence, hard-earned through frostbite and failure. As spring melts the snow and turns the camp into mud, the army prepares to move. You issue orders, reorganise units, and prepare for engagement. When the Battle of Monmouth comes that summer, your men perform like soldiers, not farmers with muskets. It's not a decisive victory, but it's proof. You've built an army. Your private life, meanwhile, remains suspended. Mount Vernon might as well be on the moon. You write occasionally to your estate manager, always inquiring about the most mundane things. Have the sheep recovered? Is the orchard producing as expected? You write to Martha's family, update them on Jackie's children now under your care, and include dry little notes like, "The flower shipment arrived late. Kindly remind them of our schedule." Even in war, you're managing a plantation from hundreds of miles away. But the burden weighs more heavily now. You've seen too much death, too much betrayal, too much rot in the systems you once trusted. Congress keeps making promises it can't keep. Your officers bicker like schoolboys. The states hoard resources. You wonder, quietly, if this new republic will even survive the war. Still, you hold it all together. Not through inspiration, but through consistency. You're not everyone's favourite. Some generals question your decisions, some politicians whisper about replacing you. But when things get bad, really bad, they always come back to you. Because you're still there, still riding through the storm, still refusing to fall. You end the year thinner, older, quieter, but your army is stronger. And slowly, painfully, you're dragging this revolution from a dream into something real. There's a strange silence that follows a war, not the kind that fills a peaceful room, but the kind that hangs over the wreckage after the last cannon goes quiet. It's 1783, and after 8 years of stumbling through blood, frost, debt, and despair, the war is finally over. The Treaty of Paris is signed. The British are leaving, the colonies have won, and you're standing on a balcony in Annapolis, Maryland, in full uniform, reading your resignation aloud to Congress with your usual deliberate calm, like you're stepping down from a minor committee, not returning absolute military power back to the people. You don't cry, you don't smile, you just fold your commission, bow and leave the room. That bow echoes for centuries, because no one expects it. Most victorious generals, especially ones who've suffered through this much, cling to power. But you give it up without hesitation. You don't want to be a king. You barely wanted to be commander-in-chief. You just wanted to go home, so that's what you do. Mount Vernon waits like a long-lost friend. When you arrive, then the house is familiar, the trees unchanged, the river just as wide and patient as ever. But you are not the same. You've come back with less hair, more scars, and a mind that no longer finds comfort in silence. The war lives inside you now, tucked between your ribs like something sharp and unfinished. Martha meets you on the front steps. She's not running toward you or bursting into tears. Neither of you are that kind of person. But her eyes soften, and for a brief moment the mask of command slips. You're home. You've survived. That's enough. For a while life settles into something resembling peace. You rise early as always, inspect the grounds, reconnect with your workers, though the enslaved community is now larger, more complex, and increasingly restless. The war stirred something, even here. Some of your enslaved workers escaped during the chaos and never returned. Others hoped that your fight for liberty might extend to them. It doesn't. Not yet. You go back to managing the plantation with the same attention to detail that got you through battles. You write pages of instructions for your overseers, mapping out the work week by the hour, even assigning which enslaved families should move where. You're still treating people like property. You know it's wrong. You also know you're not ready to change it. The contradiction sits in you like a splinter. You're also raising grandchildren now, Jackie's kids since he died at Yorktown. The youngest, Washi, is lively and stubborn. You try to teach him discipline, to make him into something steady and noble. It mostly doesn't work. He slouches, complains, sneaks off from lessons. You write long, exhausted letters about him to relatives, asking for advice that never helps. You love the boy, but he's not the son you never had. He's just another project, one you can't seem to get right. And yet, domestic life does have its rhythms. You plant trees, you plan expansions, you write essays on farming. You become obsessed with new methods, crop rotation, composting, soil chemistry. You import exotic seeds from Europe. You introduce mules to Virginia agriculture. You're a man who has commanded armies, but now you spend hours deciding how deep to dig a trench for turnips. Your neighbours stop by often. They want to see the general, not the farmer, not the man in dusty boots and dirt-streaked breeches walking through corn rows. They want the war hero, the myth. You smile politely, serve tea, and count the minutes until they leave. Here's a little-known fact. You start hosting dinners with ridiculous attention to detail. Not just the food, though you insist on fresh game, good wine, and precise silver settings, but the seating arrangements. You know exactly where to place each guest, who should be near the fire, who gets the best cut of ham, who should be seated far away from the talkative widow with strong opinions on the British poetry. You control the social flow of every evening like it's a military campaign. And in the quiet hours, when the house finally settles and the candles burn low, you sit by the window in your study, reading letters by the dim light. You've kept nearly everything: correspondence from fellow officers, requests from strangers, thank you notes, angry complaints, even awkward fan mail from foreign admirers. You organise it all, file it, respond when necessary. You're building something in those letters, a version of yourself, a legacy, but peace doesn't last. By the late 1780s, the young nation is fracturing. The Articles of Confederation supposed to bind the states together are unravelling. Trade disputes break out. State currencies collapse. Farmers rebel in Massachusetts. People start talking about monarchy again. It's chaos. And suddenly, those same men who once begged you to step down are now begging you to return. Not as a general this time, but as a unifier. As the one person the people still trust, you resist. Politely. Firmly. You write them back with your usual elegant avoidance. I have retired from public life. You mean it. Mostly. But the letters keep coming, and you keep reading. Eventually, you realise something painfully simple. You might be the only person who can hold this fragile experiment together. Not with speeches or ambition, just with presence, with steadiness. So in 1787, you agree to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. You pack your trunks again, press your uniform again, mount your horse again, and ride north again. Martha says little when you leave. She's disappointed, of course, but not surprised. She knew the war didn't really end in 1783, it just changed shape. And you're not happy about returning, but you've already given everything else. Might as well give the rest. Philadelphia again. Same cobbled streets, same whiff of smoke and damp wool in the air. But the mood this time is more anxious than rebellious. It's May of 1787, and you arrive quietly. No parade, no trumpets, just the heavy sound of your boots on the steps of the Pennsylvania State House. Everyone already knows you're coming. Delegates from across the newly freed states are gathering here for what's being called a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation. Though everyone knows it's really a do-over. The country isn't working. Commerce is a mess. The government has no teeth, and the states are bickering like spoiled cousins fighting over inheritance. So once again, you're expected to fix it. You don't want for this. Truly. Privately, you're exhausted. You left your fields just beginning to bloom back home. You left Martha again, without promising how long you'd be gone. But the moment you walk into that room, tall, silent, dressed in a plain brown suit trimmed with just enough dignity to remind people who you are, everyone stands. No one even tells them to, they just do it. It's automatic. You're unanimously elected to preside over the convention. Not a single dissenting vote. Not because they expect you to contribute brilliant legal theory. No, you're not a constitutional philosopher. You barely speak during the debates. You're there because your presence keeps the wheels from flying off. You are simply the human anchor in a room full of competing egos and fragile alliances. Your job is simple on paper. Moderate the discussion, keep order, nod at the right times, but it's what you don't say that gives the whole thing gravity. When tempers flare between the larger and smaller states, you sit unmoved. When the question of representation nearly breaks the room in half, you say nothing, yet your silence is like a sermon. People read your expression the way others read scripture. If your jaw tightens, if your brow furrows, someone changes their vote. In private, though, you're absorbing everything. You review drafts by candlelight. You speak occasionally in side rooms, lending weight with your presence rather than your arguments. You prefer clear rules, firm executive power, and unity over faction. You don't trust mob rule, but you don't want monarchy either. Somewhere between the chaos of total liberty and the suffocation of tyranny is the ideal, and you're determined to help them find it, even if you never say how out loud. One strange moment. During the early weeks, you receive a mysterious package addressed to His Excellency. Inside, a pair of spectacles and a letter from an admirer suggesting you use them in public to appear more learned. You smile, briefly. You already wear glasses when reading, of course, but the suggestion that you perform intellect tickles you in a way very little does. You keep the letter, and the glasses. Meanwhile, back at Mount Vernon, your estate manager writes regularly. There are updates on rainfall, sheep birthings, orchard blights. You reply in your usual exacting style, directing crop rotations, fencing, repairs, even down to the angle at which new grapevines should be trained. You're thousands of miles from your farm, but still managing it as if you were walking the fields barefoot. You also continue writing to Martha, who misses you but doesn't ask you to come home. She understands, maybe better than anyone, that you don't belong entirely to her anymore. You belong to the country. Still, you send her packages from the city, fabric, lace, the occasional trinket. You're not romantic on paper, but you're thoughtful. You remember what colours she prefers. You remember to ask about the grandchildren. As summer deepens, the heat turns the State House into a slow oven. Windows are shut for secrecy, and the air grows thick with the smell of sweat and parchment. The men argue over every clause. Should there be one house or two? Should the president be elected or appointed? How long should his term last? What if the people choose wrong? What if the states rebel? One moment cuts deeper than most, the debate over slavery. Some want it abolished entirely, others threaten to walk if it's even questioned. You sit still, a statue of composure, but inside you wrestle with the truth. You own over 100 enslaved people. Your life, your wealth, your entire estate depends on their labour. Yet the idea of enshrining slavery into the foundation of the country makes your stomach turn. You say nothing in the official record, but your silence is heavy. Historians will debate this moment endlessly. Some say you should have spoken up, others say your silence helped keep the fragile union together. You say nothing. At last, after 4 grueling months, the Constitution is finished. Not perfect, far from it, but functional, stronger than the Articles, balanced, a framework for something that could last. You sign it without hesitation, and when it's done, you bow again, just like in Annapolis, and return home. But you don't get to rest for long. Almost immediately the letters begin. From Boston, from Charleston, from Congress itself. They're polite, of course, always, but they all say the same thing: you need to be the first president. You must lend your name, your face, your integrity to this fragile newborn government. Without you, people won't trust it. Without you, it might not survive. You resist. You tell them you've done your duty. You tell them you're too old, too tired, that you just want to farm. But they don't stop, and deep down you know what Martha already suspects. You're going to say yes, so you prepare. You write letters asking about carriage routes and lodging options for the journey to New York City, the temporary capital. You dust off your best suit. You measure yourself for a new one. You ask for the exact schedule of the inaugural events, not because you want attention, but because you want control. You're about to step into the most public role in American history, and you intend to manage every moment of it down to the minute. But late at night, when the house is quiet and your boots are by the hearth, you still sit with your ledgers. You calculate grain yields. You trace crop maps. You write letters about manure. You're not chasing the presidency, but you know it's coming. Spring 1789. The trees outside Mount Vernon are leafing out, the air smells like damp soil and distant rain, and you're absolutely dreading what's coming. Not war, not death. Worse, public celebration, applause, endless as cheering. You've been officially elected the first president of the United States, unanimously no less. And now the entire country seems determined to smother you in praise and ceremony. You would have preferred a quiet letter, a brief nod of recognition, maybe a congratulatory pie from a neighbour. Instead, you're about to ride to New York City like a reluctant monarch. All eyes watching your every move, looking for proof that this republic might actually survive. You say goodbye to Mount Vernon with a kind of bitter affection. You've put off this departure as long as you possibly could. You walk the grounds one last time, inspecting the greenhouse, the stables, the spinning house. The enslaved workers watch you go with expressions that are impossible to read. Some may be glad, others may be terrified about who's taking charge in your absence. You nod to them, as always, and mount your horse. The journey to New York becomes a kind of royal parade, exactly what you didn't want. You stop in town after town, and in each one they've planned something: dinners, speeches, militia displays, children are reciting awkward poems. You endure it all with your trademark controlled politeness. You bow, you shake hands. You smile a little. You do not enjoy this. You don't even pretend to enjoy it, but you do understand it. The people need this. They need to see that the government is real, stable, human, and to them you are that government. Your carriage arrives in New York with a small cavalry of admirers trailing behind you. You're tired, itchy from the road dust, and deeply concerned that someone's going to make you wear a crown. Thankfully, they don't, but the city itself is dressed like it's throwing a wedding. Flags hang from windows, church bells ring, crowds swell. You can barely move through the streets without being stopped. The inauguration itself on April 30th is surreal. You wear a brown suit made of American cloth. Simple, elegant, intentional. Your hand rests on a Bible. The oath of office is short, formal, unfamiliar. You end it by saying, "So help me God," which no one told you to say, but it sounds right and it sticks. You bow in no speech, just a nod. And somewhere far away, a bell tolls for this strange new world that just became real. And then the pressure begins. Your days in New York are filled with protocol because there is no protocol. Everything you do, say, eat or wear becomes precedent. If you dine alone, people worry you're cold. If you dine too publicly, they call it royal behaviour. If you ride in a simple carriage, you're being too modest. If you upgrade to a fancier one, you're a tyrant in disguise. You can't win, so you walk the line like a tightrope walker in buckled shoes. You start your day at 5 a.m, as always. No one asks you to, you just do. Old habits. You read correspondence for an hour, drink tea, never coffee, and then begin your parade of meetings. Congressmen, cabinet members, visiting dignitaries, ordinary citizens writing about lost pensions or unfair taxes or rats in their post office. Everyone wants something. You listen patiently, you nod, you write it down in your neat hand. Then you take a long walk at sunset, alone if you can manage it, just to remember what the Potomac used to smell like at dusk. And oh, the letters. You thought wartime correspondence was bad. This is worse. Now everyone in America is writing to you. They want appointments, advice, patronage, opinions. Some write just to say hello. Others tell you how to do your job. You answer as many as you can with measured, cautious language, avoiding anything too political, too emotional, too real, because every word now belongs to the Republic, even your sighs. One particularly strange request comes from a man asking you to name his newborn son. You don't. You write a polite note encouraging virtuous names. Another letter suggests you grow your hair out and wear it unpowdered to symbolize freedom. You ignore that one. Some things are not up for debate. And yet beneath the rigid surface, you're shaping a nation. Quietly, methodically. You choose a cabinet. Jefferson for state, Hamilton for treasury, Knox for war. You don't love all of them. You definitely don't love the way Hamilton seems to energize every room with his endless stream of ideas and thinly veiled ambition. But you recognize talent when you see it. You balance egos like a circus act, pitting brilliance against principle, ambition against restraint. You're not a philosopher, you're a referee. Meals become your one refuge. Martha arrives a few weeks into your presidency, bringing with her a breath of normalcy and exactly the kind of silence you've missed. She hosts dinners, coordinates events, and smiles at all the right people. She hates the spotlight too. You're perfect in that way. Together you create what people start calling the Republican court, not in the royal sense, but in the sense of dignity, civility, quiet power. And yet, behind the dinners and fanfare, your health is declining. The years have caught up to you. Your teeth are a nightmare, what's left of them. You now wear a full set of dentures made from carved ivory and, rumour has it, some animal bone. They don't fit well. They click when you talk. They ache constantly. Your mouth is always sore. You eat mostly soft foods and avoid smiling in public. When you do, it looks painful, because it is. There's a fringe theory that your dentures include human teeth, possibly bought from enslaved people. And while you've never confirmed it, your account books do contain entries for 9 teeth bought from Negroes. It's one of those quiet horrors people ignore when they're trying to paint you as marble. But it lingers. You also suffer from chronic inflammation, stomach problems, frequent headaches. You never complain, but your journals hint at the toll. Still, you don't rest. You can't. Because the nation is watching. Because every small decision, how you greet visitors, how often you speak to Congress, whether you ride a horse or a carriage, feels like it could steer the entire country left or right. You miss Mount Vernon more than you thought possible. You ask about it in nearly every letter. How fares the garden? Have the fences been repaired? Please ensure the cherry trees are not crowded by the new plantings. You even give instructions about manure, down to the placement of the compost heaps. It's your way of staying grounded, quite literally. In quiet moments, you dream of walking the orchard at dusk. No crowds, no applause, just the crunch of dirt under your boots and the soft sounds of birds settling into the trees. But you're not there yet. You're still here. The president. And you have work to do. You don't talk much in public. You never really have. But when you do speak, people lean in. Whether you're offering advice, a command, or just a gentle reminder to stir the porridge before it burns. You've always believed in the power of silence, in the weight of unspoken things. But now, as president, even your silences are being studied like scripture. People write entire newspaper columns analysing your posture at state dinners. They speculate about what your pauses mean. They count how many times you clear your throat during speeches. You could blink wrong and accidentally trigger a stock market fluctuation. So naturally, everyone's obsessed with how you talk. Not just what you say, but the way you say it. And truth be told, your speech is a peculiar cocktail of colonial formality, southern drawl, and a sort of worn-down soldier's rhythm. You speak slowly, like every word has to go through customs before being allowed out of your mouth. Your tone is deep, steady, and a little gravelly, not dramatic, not musical, but tedious in a way that makes everyone else in the room instinctively lower their voices. People expect some kind of philosophical eloquence when you open your mouth. Jefferson has that. Hamilton has it in manic spades. You don't. Your words aren't ornate, they're measured, plain, and built for durability. When you write, it's the same. Your letters often run long, but not because you're poetic. You just refuse to leave room for misunderstanding. Every clause is reinforced with a clause. Every sentence is sandbagged. It's less like reading prose and more like walking through a legal fortress. Still, there's something oddly comforting about it. You don't play verbal games, you don't flatter, and you absolutely never joke in public, at least not in any way people would recognise. But privately, you do have a sense of humour. Dry, bone dry, It's the kind of humour that takes a minute to land, like once, during a particularly dull meeting, you're said to have muttered, just loud enough for the table to hear, "I suppose even Pharaoh had worse days." A small smile, a few raised eyebrows, no laughter, but a mutual acknowledgement. Washington just made a joke. Your written voice, meanwhile, is a different beast altogether. You're a compulsive writer. Letters, lists, diaries, plans, even instructions on how to position garden trellises for aesthetic balance. You underline everything. You capitalise words mid-sentence for no modern reason. You're also deeply inconsistent with spelling. You'll write connection in one letter and connection in the next, sometimes within the same paragraph. It's not laziness, it's just the 18th century, and no one's really nailed down how English works yet. Still, your letters are goldmines for historians. They show the full range of your personality: the farmer, the commander, the exhausted grandfather, the civic architect. One letter to a friend describes your dentures in excruciating detail, and ends with an apology for the liberty taken in discussing my own teeth at such length. Another carefully outlines instructions for pruning peach trees and transitions, without irony, into concerns over the stability of the national treasury. You are, in short, a man who treats peaches and paper currency with equal gravity. There's one recurring theme in your writing: reputation. You don't say it outright, but it bleeds through the ink. You know people are watching. You know every decision you make now will echo far into the future. You're constantly calibrating your tone to be both firm and fair. You avoid personal attacks, even when someone thoroughly deserves it. You do not name your enemies. You do not pick fights. You play the long game, always. This even shows up in your handwritten edits. You'll revise a sentence 10 times to soften a phrase, to remove any trace of spite. One surviving draft of a letter shows you replacing ignorant fool with misguided gentleman of limited perspective. You don't want your legacy to include pettiness, not because you're above it, but because you don't think it helps anything. But one of the oddest things about your voice, both spoken and written, is how restrained it is when it comes to emotion. You'll express duty, concern, disappointment, but joy? Not really. Anger? Rarely. Grief? Almost never. When Jackie died, your diary entry was just, "Mr. Custis died." No elaboration, no anguish. Just a flat declaration that the boy was gone. You're not made of stone, you just believe emotion should be private, especially if you're leading a fragile republic made of nervous states and easily offended senators. This restraint sometimes worries people. Foreign diplomats report back to Europe saying, "You're either the most composed man alive or an emotionally empty shell." The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. You feel deeply, you just don't show it. Instead, you process your grief through routines. You mourn through paperwork, you bury disappointment under discipline. Still, you do have preferences, you love horses, and you speak more freely around them than you do around people. Stable hands report you often murmur to your animals while brushing them, offering quiet praise or complaints about the weather. You enjoy well-balanced Madeira, detest excessive ceremony, and have absolutely no patience for small talk. You once left a dinner early because a guest wouldn't stop telling a story about a fish he caught that may or may not have been real. You claimed illness, no one questioned it. When speaking in front of Congress, your voice tightens even more. Your first State of the Union address is only a few paragraphs long, just enough to affirm unity, suggest policies, and then get off the stage. You find no joy in speeches, you find relief in ending them, but every word you say is intentional, and people remember them, because you don't speak unless you have to. There's a weird comfort in knowing that the most powerful man in the country is also the quietest. You're like a fireplace that never flares, but never goes out. Calm, steady, just enough heat to keep the house from freezing. People start copying you. Young politicians try to speak like you, deep voice, careful diction, stern pauses. They fail mostly, because it only works when it's real. And for you, it is real. You've built your entire life around the idea that words should be earned, not tossed around like musket balls at a tavern brawl. And yet, even in all this solemn restraint, people trust you. Because you don't sell anything, you don't push, you don't perform, and you simply are. And in an era full of pamphleteers, blowhards, and political schemers, that's a kind of poetry all its own. You've always been a man who can tolerate discomfort. Years of marching through sleet and mud will do that to you. But there's one thing that consistently tests your patience. One irritant you can't outmarch or outmaneuver: pettiness. And unfortunately for you, the nation's capital is now a swirling soup of it. It's 1781, and your presidency, which was supposed to be dignified, orderly, and quietly competent, has instead become a front-row seat to the birth of partisan warfare. You hate it, not in the theatrical table-slamming way. You're not a yeller, but inside you're seething. Every day you're caught between two of the smartest, most ambitious men you've ever known, Jefferson and Hamilton, and they're both acting like rival siblings fighting for your attention, except their weapons are newspapers and anonymous editorials. One wants a nation of farmers and local power, the other wants central banks and bustling cities, and you want both of them to grow up and stop writing mean things about each other in the press. You try to stay neutral above the fray. But neutrality, you quickly learn, is not silence. It's just a quieter kind of noise. No matter what you say or don't say, someone is convinced you've picked a side. Jefferson sulks when you praise Hamilton. Hamilton pouts when you agree with Jefferson. You manage them like you used to manage battalions, only with less shouting and more sighing. At night, you collapse into bed with your brain buzzing like a hornet's nest. You don't sleep much. You lie awake thinking about the shape of the country, how fast the seams are pulling. Factions, columns, rumours, even friends have started choosing sides. The press, once an occasional nuisance, is now an active opponent. You've become a target, not because of scandal, but because your dignity is boring. You don't sell papers unless someone's accusing you of being a secret monarch, or claiming that your birthday cake had too many candles and that proves you're too old to govern. And then there's the strange business of your second term. You didn't want one. At all. You wrote drafts, multiple drafts of farewell addresses. You were ready to step down, but no one else was ready to let you. Congress begged. The people begged. Hamilton begged. Even Jefferson, who regularly trash talks you behind your back, agreed you were the only one who could keep the country from unravelling. You were tired, your teeth hurt, your joints ached, and your patience was being slowly whittled away by petty cabinet feuds, but you said yes, again, because you still believed the country wasn't ready to go it alone, and that meant more drama. Here's one of your least favourite things: presidential receptions. You hold them because you're supposed to, but you despise them. Every Tuesday afternoon, people come to your residence, line up like they're waiting for communion, and get a brief moment in front of you. They bow, you bow, they compliment your coat, you nod, you ask them how they're enjoying the city, they say something vaguely flattering. You move to the next one. It's scripted, ceremonial, and painfully awkward. You once wrote that they were too formal to afford pleasure and too familiar to afford dignity. In other words, it's like having dinner with 1,000 people who all want something and none of them are any fun, and yet you still do it. Because everything is precedent. You're trying to invent the role of president from scratch without slipping into monarchy or chaos. Too aloof and you're a king, too casual and you're a mayor with better shoes. So you thread the needle over and over. Every handshake, every invitation, every speech is measured for balance, even the little things. You debate whether to visit Congress in person or send written messages. You wonder whether the president should host foreign diplomats at state dinners or leave it to the Secretary of State. You spend an embarrassing amount of time deciding if you should personally tour the southern states or just send letters. You end up going. It's exhausting, the roads are terrible, your back hurts for weeks, and all the while your personal habits become national curiosities. People want to know what you eat, what you wear, how many horses pull your carriage, whether your step-grandchildren are well behaved. You receive fan mail from children, angry letters from farmers, poems, marriage proposals, even a drawing of a pig with your face on it sent anonymously from Boston. You file most of it away without comment, but privately you're annoyed. You didn't fight a revolution and command starving soldiers through 8 winters so you could be called a would-be Caesar by a guy named Elbridge in a Philadelphia newsletter. Your patience isn't infinite. Sometimes you write scathing drafts of letters you never send. You pace your study, muttering about slander, about ungenerous abuse, about people with malignant hearts and uninformed minds. Then you cross it all out and write something neutral. Because that's what leaders do. You absorb the punches, you don't punch back. But every once in a while the real you slips through. A private letter to a friend confesses that you're wearied to death. Another notes, with beautiful understatement, that public service offers no personal enjoyment. And in one journal entry you write simply, "The torrent of malicious abuse which has been poured upon me is beyond the power of all human exertions to avoid." Still you get up, Every morning, early as always, you review the papers, walk the perimeter of your residence, read the daily flood of correspondence. You greet guests, consult with your cabinet, suffer through long dinners and longer debates. You answer the same question for the 50th time. You listen, nod, write, nod again, steady, always steady. One odd comfort, your garden. You still get updates about Mount Vernon, and sometimes you step outside just to tend a patch of flowers or inspect the growth of a few potted herbs. There's peace in plants. They don't bicker. They don't slander you. They either live or they don't. And you can usually tell which with a single glance. The public keeps pulling at you. Some still love you. Others are tired of you. But you're just trying to hold this ship together. You didn't ask for sainthood. You asked for a chance to retire. Maybe next year. Maybe. If power were a coin, Martha would know which side you're hiding. To the public, you're the president, the dignified statue, the father of the country, the man with the steady hand and the gaze fixed on the future. But at home, in those rare slivers of time when the doors are closed and the candles are low, Martha knows the quieter truth. You're tired. Not just physically, though your back constantly aches and your false teeth have become medieval torture devices. No, this is a soul-deep fatigue, the kind that creeps in when you've carried a nation on your shoulders for too long. Martha sees it in the way you pinch the bridge of your nose after meetings, in the stack of unopened correspondence you keep putting off until tomorrow, in the way you look out the window, not through it, but into it, like the Potomac is calling you home, whispering across the distance between duty and rest. She doesn't talk much about politics, never really has, but she listens. When Jefferson resigns in a storm cloud of ideological outrage, she doesn't cheer. When Hamilton pushes a national bank with all the subtlety of a cannon blast, she doesn't argue. But she knows which days you come home irritated and which days you come home defeated. She adjusts the rhythm of the household accordingly. Fewer visitors, a shorter supper, extra tea by the fire. She's not a political wife in the way people would define it now. She's more like your equilibrium. There's quiet power in that. In the way she hosts dinners where opposing senators sit across from each other and manage not to throw punches because she's in the room. In the way she writes careful letters to distant relatives, defending your character without once raising her voice. In the way she gives your grandchildren now crashing through the residence like miniature tornadoes, the kind of a warmth you can't always muster. People underestimate her, they always have. To them, she's just a First Lady, though no one has called her that yet. She's Mrs. Washington, which somehow feels even more formal, like she's been bronzed by association. But Martha was managing vast estates before most of your advisors had learned to spell. She's signed more checks than Hamilton. She knows how to read a ledger, how to balance a guest list, how to spot a social climber within 5 seconds of shaking their hand. And she's seen you at your worst. At Valley Forge, when the men were starving and you hadn't slept in days, it was Martha who arrived in the bitter cold with homemade clothes and hot food, who organised sewing circles and inoculation campaigns like it was just another Tuesday. When Jackie died, she held you upright in the days you refused to cry. When your step-grandchildren acted out, again, it was her who knew when to punish and when to simply raise an eyebrow. You trust her in ways you don't trust anyone else. Your cabinet, brilliant but slippery. Congress, useful but exhausting. The press, a headache printed in columns, but Martha, she's the only person you can sit in silence with and not feel like you're being measured. When you wake in the night from a dream, you can't quite remember. Some mix of cannons, frost and voices you used to know. It's her steady breathing that pulls you back. And yet, even in private, there's distance. Not emotional coldness, but restraint. You don't gush, you don't write love letters, you don't lean into the soft places. That's not who either of you are. You were married more for partnership than passion, though affection did grow. She was a wealthy widow when you met, and you, a land-hungry young officer, saw in her the promise of stability. But over time, your connection has become something deeper. Not romantic, but rooted. You don't tell her everything. You never have. Not because you don't trust her, but because you've trained yourself to carry burdens alone. You compartmentalize. You seal things in boxes. There are letters she never sees, fears you never voice, decisions you never explain. She doesn't press, she just watches, observes, offers tea instead of questions. And when things go wrong, when political allies turn, when newspapers insult you, when your health worsens, she doesn't panic. She simply adjusts the household, tightens the schedules, sends polite refusals to invitations you no longer have the energy for. She's your social buffer, your silent shield. There's one letter you wrote to her during the war that historians will obsess over. It's short, polite, full of restraint. But it ends with a line that catches people off guard. I retain an unalterable affection for you, which neither time nor distance can change. That's as close as you'll ever get to romantic poetry. And in your world, that's practically Shakespeare. She keeps that letter. Private. Tucked away. The two of you rarely show affection in public. You don't hold hands, you don't use pet names, but you have a kind of choreography, unspoken but practiced. She hands you your gloves just before you leave. You nod when you want her to end a conversation with a guest. You brush her hand briefly when you pass behind her chair. It's not passion, it's partnership refined over decades. A shared language made of gestures. When you finally do talk, late at night, in that quiet space between supper and sleep, it's not about laws or banks, it's about the orchard. About your grandchildren, about the new linen order from Philadelphia. You tell her about a letter from a farmer in Vermont who named a goat after you. She laughs, not loudly, but sincerely. Martha doesn't care that you're a legend. She doesn't care that your face is going to end up on coins or that schools will be named after you. She cares that the potatoes aren't planted late, that the chimney is drawing properly, that you're not forgetting to eat breakfast. And honestly, that's what you need. Not flattery, not crowds, just someone who sees you not as Mr. President, but as George, the man who snores sometimes, who walks the grounds in silence, who overplans everything, who still can't convince Washi to sit still for more than 5 minutes. She grounds you, she always has. And in a world that seems determined to pull you in 100 directions at once, it's her quiet, stubborn presence that keeps you facing forward. Your letters are never meant for poetry. They're written with the same deliberation you bring to everything else, structured, restrained, useful. And yet, over the years, a surprising intimacy slips through the ink. Not often, not with many. But there are a few letters that read like you let your guard down. Just a little. Maybe your hand was tired. Maybe the fire was burning low. Or maybe, for a flickering moment, you forgot that history might someday read them. One set of letters in particular continues to raise eyebrows, long after your body is dust. The ones to Sally Fairfax. She was married, of course, married to your best friend George William Fairfax, and you were never reckless. Never the kind of man to chase scandal or flirt with fire. But something about her lingered. She was witty, elegant, just a little mysterious. She carried herself with the ease of someone who always knew she was the most interesting person in the room and never had to prove it. You met her when you were young, before the war, before the presidency, before the idea of a nation was even something worth carving into stone. Back then you were just a land-hungry surveyor with ambitions bigger than your bank account and a wardrobe that didn't quite match your dreams. Sally was already at the top of the social ladder. You were climbing it, and she saw you not as a title or a reputation, but as a person with sharp eyes and awkward silences and maybe more inside than you let most people see. You wrote to her often, sometimes under the guise of politeness, sometimes because it was expected, and once or twice you slipped. You told her, with as much delicacy as your rigid language allowed, that you admired her more than you should. One letter speaks of the tumultuous wishes which yet have not been, and I trust never shall be, breathed. It's classic you. Passion wrapped in an apology, sealed in wax. Historians have a field day with these letters. They argue about intent. Was it harmless sentiment? A restrained confession? A man hedging his emotions with honour? They never really agree. And you, predictably, never addressed them again. After your marriage to Martha, the tone changes. The letters become cooler, less frequent, more formal. You don't cut Sally out entirely, you never could, but you place the boundary there and don't cross it. Still, the trace of feeling never quite disappears, and maybe that's what makes it so fascinating. Not that you acted on it, but that you almost did. You never burn those letters. Martha will eventually, after your death, quietly, with a little ceremony. She'll destroy nearly all your private correspondence with her too, not out of spite, but out of protection. Because she knows the world wants to turn you into a monument, and she'd rather it not read your feelings like grocery receipts. She was never one for spectacle. She understood the weight of myth. Other correspondents populate your life, of course. You trade dense political essays with Hamilton, each letter a small battle of punctuation and passion. You exchange cautious philosophical notes with Jefferson, until even the paper begins to sense your growing distance. You write to Lafayette like a father writes to a son, part affection, part instruction. Your letters to him carry warmth, pride, even grief. When his wife is imprisoned during the French Revolution, you write with genuine anguish, promising to help. You send quiet aid. You never abandon him. To others, your tone varies. You're warmer with children, stricter with overseers, politely distant with admirers. You hate flattery, and it shows. The more someone praises you in ink, the shorter your reply. One man sends you a 17-page tribute poem. You reply with 6 lines about the weather and an update on your mule breeding experiments. Still, writing is where you exist most clearly. Spoken conversation for you is a battlefield of timing and restraint, but on the page you control the pace, the structure, the mood. You leave space for pauses, you revise without anyone seeing, you can be precise, and you live for precision. And yet for all your efforts to manage your voice, your reputation, your relationships, things still spiral beyond your control. The newspapers grow bolder. The anti-federalists accuse you of playing monarch. They mock your formal dinners, your carriage, your bowed greetings. Cartoons appear, essays with the veiled threats. You're called His Highness, King George II, and, most bizarrely, the American Cincinnatus, a Roman farmer general who gave up power and went back to his plough. That one, at least, you don't mind. You don't respond to the attacks, not publicly, not ever. But you save them, you file them, you make notes, not for revenge, just for the record, for posterity, for control. That's always been your way. But the tension wears on you. You age visibly. Your hands shake more. Your gait stiffens. You no longer write as often. Your letters grow shorter, with more corrections, more cross-outs. You once spent hours perfecting a line. Now you settle for good enough. Still, when you write to young men, students, soldiers, aspiring politicians, you offer sincere advice. You tell them to value character above achievement, to speak less and observe more, to serve with dignity and avoid public quarrelling. And always, always to remember that virtue isn't something you talk about, it's something you live. One young man writes asking if you regret never having children of your own. You don't answer directly. You say you've been blessed with many to care for. It's true in a way. But sometimes when you look at Jackie's son playing by the hearth, the absence still settles in your chest like dust. As the end of your second term approaches, the letters shift. They begin to thank you, to plead with you, to beg you not to step down. Some call you irreplaceable, others more dramatic, the pillar on which liberty rests. You don't believe all of it, but you appreciate the sentiment. Still, you've made up your mind, you've already begun drafting your farewell address. You've written and rewritten it more times than you'll admit. The final version is sober, cautious, a warning, more than a goodbye. You urge unity, avoid partisanship, stay out of foreign entanglements, be better than ambition. Some read it and nod, others ignore it entirely, but you know how little control you'll have once you leave. You can only plant the idea, the rest is up to them. And so you write. Until your eyes burn, until the candle gutters, until the page is full and you've said everything you can without saying too much. Then you fold the paper, seal it, and quietly begin preparing to go home. You've left power before, but this time it feels different. In 1797, when you finally step away from the presidency after 2 grueling terms, it's not just a farewell, it's a full exhale, the kind that's been building in your chest for nearly a decade. You don't cry, you don't pause for applause, you just quietly hand the office to John Adams, nod at the gathered crowd, and get into your carriage. The moment is historic, the first peaceful transfer of power in the fragile new republic, but you treat it like you're heading out of a particularly long committee meeting. If anyone thought you'd cling to office like a king, you've proven them wrong again. The ride back to Mount Vernon is long and slow, but every mile feels like shedding a second skin. The cities give way to small towns, then wide fields, then the familiar curve of the Potomac River. When the house finally comes into view, your jaw clenches, not from anxiety, but from sheer relief. You're home. You can smell it. The wet earth, the cedar smoke curling from the kitchen chimneys, the distant sound of hooves in the paddock. You've been gone a long time and everything has changed except the view. Martha is waiting. Not on the steps, she's not dramatic like that, but just inside the entry hall, already giving orders to the staff to bring hot water and unpack the trunks. She smiles when she sees you, and it's the first moment you've felt fully real in years. You're not President Washington here. You're George, husband, farmer, slightly irritable grandfather. The estate is bigger now. You've acquired more land over the years, more livestock, more debt, more of everything. but the rhythms remain the same. Fields to walk, fences to mend, meals to plan, fires to build. The enslaved community is larger too. Over 300 people now labouring under your ownership, divided between skilled tradesmen, house servants, field workers, and hired out hands. Their names fill your account books like furniture entries. It's the quiet machinery of your wealth, and you still justify it the way you always have, with slow logic, gradual intentions, promises to yourself that you'll figure out how to end it one day. Just not today. You rise early again, like before. No official duties now, but habits don't retire. You're out walking before the sun clears the trees, dressed in your worn boots and greatcoat, nodding to the overseers, checking on the barns. You've got plans, always. Rotating crops, repairing the mill, designing a new barn that'll catch more light in the winter months. You're still obsessed with symmetry, and the idea that a well-ordered farm is the outward sign of a well-ordered life. One odd new routine? Visitors, constant ones. Some are old friends, many are total strangers. People show up uninvited just to catch a glimpse of you walking through the orchard. You humour them, pose for the occasional sketch, let them watch you inspect a load of wheat as if it's the highlight of their trip. You're becoming folklore in real time, and you hate it. But also, secretly, you understand it. This country still needs its symbols. Your private letters grow softer in tone, still formal, still structured, but there's a melancholy that creeps in. You tell friends you're happy to be retired, but you admit the nation's divisions worry you. Political parties are hardening into enemies. The press has become venomous. Even your own legacy is being split in half. To some, you're the quiet guardian of liberty. To others, a secret monarch in a powdered wig. You try not to care, but you do. Your health isn't what it was. You've got arthritis in your hands, making it harder to write. You still wear your dentures, but they fit worse than ever. You've developed a rasp in your throat and occasional chest pains that you stubbornly ignore. When asked about your well-being, you always say the same thing, I am tolerably well, which for you means you can still walk unassisted and haven't collapsed in front of the livestock. Still, you keep busy, you reorganise your papers, recatalogue your library, draft more instructions for the farm than anyone could reasonably follow. You oversee construction on your distillery. It turns out making whiskey might be one of your most profitable ventures, which is both amusing and a little ironic given your role in crushing the Whiskey Rebellion a few years earlier. You receive reports about the aging casks with almost boyish satisfaction. You also begin writing out plans for the eventual freeing of your enslaved workers. Just yours, not the ones Martha inherited from the Custis estate. The legal mess is enormous, but you draft the documents anyway, quietly, carefully. You've delayed long enough to... You know it won't fix what you've participated in, but it's something. You hope future generations will do better. You leave instructions that your enslaved workers be freed upon Martha's death, which is the best compromise you can muster within the legal and social constraints you refuse to fully break. You don't talk much about politics anymore. When you hear that President Adams and Jefferson are feuding, you sigh deeply and go prune your grapevines. When you read about newspapers accusing each other of sedition, you stroke your chin and recommend better crop rotation to your neighbours. You've learned that the louder the government gets, the more important it is to cultivate something quiet. You spend more time with your grandchildren now, Nellie and Washi, though they test your patience. Washi is still restless, still underachieving, still more interested in his wardrobe than his future. Nellie is clever and sweet, a natural hostess. You have no heirs of your own, but they're close enough. You try to teach them structure, even as you know the world they're inheriting won't have the same rhythm you needed to survive in. Sometimes you sit on your porch in the late afternoon, watching the light shift across the Potomac. The view hasn't changed much since you were a boy. You sip tea, not because you enjoy the taste, but because it's part of the ritual. Martha sits beside you, knitting or reading or saying nothing at all. It's the silence you both understand best. You don't talk about your regrets. You write about them, quietly between lines, in margin notes, in the letters you never send. You wish the country were less divided. You wish you'd acted fast on slavery. You wish you hadn't outlived so many friends, but mostly you're grateful for time, for Mount Vernon, for the brief, strange chance to shape something bigger than yourself. You're finally at rest. Or close enough. It starts as a sore throat. Nothing unusual, really. Just a little scratchiness one morning in December of 1799. The air is cold and wet, the kind of cold that seeps into your joints and settles there like a stubborn tenant. You were out the day before, as usual, riding the perimeter of the estate in sleet and freezing rain, because the fence lines weren't going to inspect themselves. You came back soaked to the bone, refused to change your clothes until evening, because in your mind, comfort can wait and duties never do. You don't complain, that's never been your style, but by nightfall your throat tightens. Your voice comes out in a rasp. Martha notices and immediately insists you stay in bed. You smile and remind her that you've marched through blizzards and skirmishes, that a little cold can't possibly do you in. But the next morning it's worse. You can barely speak. Swallowing feels like dragging broken glass down your throat. Martha sends for the doctors. You nod reluctantly and settle under the covers with the sense that something serious is unfolding. What follows is a blur of pain, silence, and remedies that are somehow more brutal than the illness itself. The doctors arrive one by one, their boots clicking across the wooden floors, each bringing their own version of 18th century medicine, most of it centred around bloodletting. They bleed you once, then again, then a third time. You lose nearly half of your blood volume in a single day. They also blister you, make you gargle vinegar, and administer mixtures of molasses and butter and God knows what else. None of it works. You know it isn't working. You feel yourself drifting. You don't panic. Not outwardly. You've made peace with mortality long ago. On horseback in the wilderness, in frozen tents at Valley Forge, in the silence between cannon blasts. But this is different. This is your bedroom. This is your bed. This is the home you built with your own hands. Now it's where your breath is coming shallower and your chest tighter. At one point, in a rare stretch of lucidity, you ask them to stop. "Let me go in peace," you say, your voice rough and barely audible. Martha hears it. She nods, not fighting. She's seen this moment approaching before the doctors did. Her face is unreadable, calm, composed, but her eyes are full. You spend your last hours not with grand speeches or deathbed confessions, but with quiet instructions. You ask for your papers to be left in order. You confirm that your will is being followed, that the enslaved workers under your legal control will be freed, as you promised. You tell Martha not to be afraid, and then, sometime between night and morning, your breath stops. No thunder, no final declaration, just a stillness. George Washington is dead. You are 67. The nation erupts. News spreads slowly, carried by horseback and newspaper, but when it arrives, the country mourns as one. Bells toll in every city. People wear black armbands. Congress declares 30 days of official mourning, and foreign leaders, even some who once fought against you, offer condolences. Napoleon orders 10 days of mourning in France. Britain lowers its flags. People who had never seen your face outside of an engraving weep like they have lost a family member. At Mount Vernon, the funeral is small, private, just as you would have wanted. There are no parades, no marble arches, no plaster statues, just family, neighbours, and a cold December wind whispering through the trees. They bury you in a simple tomb near the river, your body wrapped, sealed, and placed in a pine coffin. No one speaks at length. Martha stays composed, though those closest to her notice that she never enters your bedroom again after that day. And now you're gone. But not really. You've left behind a country unsure of itself, full of contradictions, brimming with hope and violence and arguments yet to be settled. You warned against partisanship, and the ink was barely dry on your farewell address before the parties grew sharper. You warned against foreign entanglements, and already the US is being pulled toward the storms of Europe. You hoped for unity, but unity is fragile and people forget quickly. Still, your example lingers, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet things, in the way you gave up power twice, in the way you carried your burdens without turning bitter, in the letters, the routines, the silences. Your name becomes shorthand for American virtue. Schools, streets, towns, eventually a state. Your face ends up on money, on postage stamps, on lunchboxes. Children are told stories about you that aren't even close to true. Cherry trees, silver dollars tossed across rivers, wooden teeth. But the details don't matter as much as the feeling. You become an idea. Some people want to freeze you in marble, to polish away the contradictions, but those contradictions are still there, embedded in your legacy like fossils. You were both progressive and cautious, a freedom fighter who owned human beings, a man who refused to be king but ruled with the poise of one. You weren't perfect, you weren't close, but you tried. And in the grand experiment that is the United States, that trying might be more powerful than perfection. Historians argue about you constantly. Some praise your leadership, others dissect your silence on slavery. Some paint you as a reluctant hero, others as a land-grabbing opportunist with good PR. You can't respond, of course, but the truth, if it can even be pinned down, probably lives somewhere in between. And then there are the myths. They never stop. People claim to see your ghost walking the halls of Mount Vernon, especially near the study where you wrote your last letters. Candlelight tours swear the air turns cold near your tomb. Guides tell tourists that if they press their ear to the wall, they can hear the sound of quills scratching, the creak of boots on floorboards. You've become folklore, a bedtime story, a spirit of the Republic. But maybe that's the point. Maybe being remembered as something is more important than being remembered as everything. You were never the loudest, never the flashiest. You didn't seek power. You managed it. You didn't speak often, but when you did, the world leaned in, and when you left it, the world paused. Just long enough to remember what stillness felt like. Death is final, but being George Washington means you don't really get to stay dead in peace. Not for long, anyway. The world keeps digging you up, sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically, dragging your name back into the national conversation again and again. You'd probably roll your eyes if you knew just how often your ghost is summoned, like some stern, powdered referee to settle arguments no one even dreamed of in your lifetime. Almost immediately after your burial, the political squabbles resume. The mourning period is over, the black ribbons come off, and suddenly people are shouting in Congress again, citing your memory to defend every imaginable position. You become the nation's go-to moral compass, conveniently pointing in whatever direction the speaker needs. Someone wants a stronger federal government, they quote your farewell address. Someone else wants more state power, they remind everyone you warned against central tyranny. You've officially entered the phase of your afterlife known as public property. Your image gets busier too. Portraits flood the country, each one more dramatic than the last. You're painted on horseback, crossing rivers, praying in snowstorms, glancing nobly into the middle distance with a jawline that could cut rope. These portraits rarely look like you did in real life. They make you taller, stronger, more Roman, less tired. Even your hair seems to gain volume. There's an especially dramatic one where you're holding a sword and gesturing toward the horizon, like you've just spotted freedom cresting over a hill. You never posed like that. You would have hated it. But people want heroes, not humans, and then there's Mount Vernon. You always wanted it to remain a private residence, quiet, family-run, but eventually it becomes a pilgrimage site. Tourists arrive by boat, carriage, and eventually motorcars, all wanting to see where the great man lived and died. Some take clippings from the trees, others press their hands to the railings, as if trying to absorb a bit of your essence through the wood. You're not there, of course. But your study still smells faintly of old paper and lemon wax. The desk remains exactly where you left it, the chair slightly angled, the ink bottle dry. People start telling stories. Some are true, most are not. The cherry tree myth. Complete fabrication, courtesy of a biographer who thought your honesty needed a flashy origin story, as if commanding the Continental Army in rags wasn't enough. The silver dollar across the Potomac. Nice image, never happened. And no, your teeth weren't wooden. They were made of a gruesome mix of ivory, metal, and, yes, possibly teeth purchased from enslaved people. Which, doesn't exactly sparkle in the textbooks. But try telling that to generations of school children who grow up thinking you sprang fully formed from the revolution like Athena from Zeus's forehead. Quill in one hand, Constitution in the other. You're the ultimate bedtime story. The founding father who walked away. The president who didn't lie. The man who always did the right thing, always said the right thing, always looked slightly windswept doing it. Still, the legacy isn't all marble and myth. Over time, people start asking harder questions. About slavery, about power, about science. Why didn't you do more to end slavery during your lifetime? Why did you wait until death to free those you legally owned? Why didn't you speak louder when the young republic veered toward division? These questions echo louder with each passing generation. You don't get to answer them, of course, but your choices, your compromises, are now part of a national conversation that has no end. There are defenders, naturally. Some insist you were a man of your time, that you evolved, that you privately loathed slavery but feared the Republic was too fragile to survive the issue. Others are less generous. They call you a hypocrite, a land baron in patriot's clothing, a man who preserved his dignity at the expense of others' humanity. Both versions walk beside you now, because history, like people, rarely picks just one story, and then comes the monument building phase. The Washington Monument in DC, that giant obelisk stabbing the sky like a granite finger pointing to eternity, takes nearly a century to complete. It started, paused, redesigned, restarted. There are budget issues, civil war interruptions, bickering over height and symbolism. But eventually it stands. It becomes a beacon, a compass needle, a place where presidents lay wreaths and tourists crane their necks. Your name becomes a branding tool. Washington this, Washington that. Towns, bridges, counties, schools, universities, naval vessels, banks, airports, mountains. A whole state. If someone handed you a map now, you might wonder if you'd quietly conquered the continent in your sleep. And then there's the money. You end up on the $1 bill and the quarter, currency so common, your face becomes invisible to people using it. You're in everyone's pocket, yet rarely noticed. A quiet irony you might have appreciated. But even monuments crack. As the centuries pass, your image is no longer immune to scrutiny. People start to ask whether you should be on money at all, whether your estate built on the backs of the enslaved should be celebrated or confronted, whether the marble statue in the Capitol Rotunda should carry a footnote. You're not being erased, not even close, but you're being unwrapped, debated, studied, humanized. The marble is softening around the edges, and oddly enough, that's probably closer to the truth of who you were, because you were never perfect. You were orderly, cautious, deeply principled, and sometimes too slow to act when speed was required. You were brave, but not flashy, humble, but not without ambition. You wielded power with a steady hand and laid it down with an even steadier one. You loved your land more than most men love titles. You read soil like scripture. You believed in the quiet dignity of doing things properly, even if no one noticed. And despite the statues and paintings and cherry tree bedtime tales, what remains most fascinating about you is that you left. Twice, when you could have stayed. That restraint, that deliberate exit from power is the most revolutionary thing you ever did. More than any speech, more than any battle. You showed the world what leadership looks like when it ends. So yes, you're now a ghost of many faces, a myth and a man, a name carved into marble and printed on napkins, a symbol we argue over, a legacy we bend and stretch, but somewhere behind all of it is the real you. Standing in the early light, coat buttoned tight, hand resting on a fence post, scanning the horizon, not for glory, not for praise, but simply to see what needs doing next. Retirement round 2 is supposed to be peaceful. That was the plan. You laid it out in your farewell address with that firm, almost parental tone. No factions, no foreign entanglements, no drama, just good governance and homegrown virtue. And then you rode off into the sunset like a worn-out Roman statesman ready to prune grapevines and ignore the world's nonsense. But here's the thing about retirement when your name is George Washington. They never really let you go. You're barely unpacked when the letters start coming again. Not fan mail this time, not requests for autographs or farming advice. No, these are the big ones. Serious, urgent, France is on fire, again. Revolution has turned into bloodbath, and now the French Republic, with its guillotines and ambitions, is turning its glare toward the United States. Worse, America is teetering on the edge of a war with the same people who once helped us gain independence. The irony would almost be funny if it weren't so close to horrifying. John Adams, your successor, is up to his chin in chaos. The Federalists are panicking. The Democratic Republicans are shouting. And for the middle of it all, someone, probably Hamilton, possibly the ghost of Alexander himself if you ask Jefferson, decides what the country needs right now is you. Again, not as president, thank heavens, but as commander of a new army. A provisional army, they say, just in case things get ugly, just in case French ships start showing up on the horizon. And so at 65 years old, with stiff joints, bad teeth, and an estate you barely had time to settle back into, you agree. Of course you do. They make you Lieutenant General and Commander-in-Chief of the Armies of the United States. It sounds grand, but mostly it's a title. You're not planning to take the field unless someone drops a French musket in your breakfast. You appoint Hamilton as your second-in-command, a move that makes Jefferson clench his jaw hard enough to crack a molar. You know it'll stir controversy. You do it anyway. Because for all Hamilton's arrogance and theatrics, you trust him to get things done. And at this point, you don't have the energy to babysit a war in a cabinet full of squabbling egos. So here you are, once again writing letters about troop arrangements and supply lines, all while pretending not to notice that your own body is trying to clock out. You issue instructions from Mount Vernon, reading dispatches by candlelight, writing with increasingly cramped fingers. Your handwriting, once crisp and decisive, is starting to slant like it's trying to lie down. But still, you sign every letter, every order, because your name still means something, and you're not about to let it become ceremonial. The war never happens, not exactly. Tensions with France de-escalate. Treaties are signed. The quasi-war, as historians will later call it, because apparently every conflict needs a catchy title, fades before it catches fire. Your provisional army is quietly shelved, and you're released again from public duty. This time it seems to stick. But the country has changed since you first took office. Factions have become parties. Politics is louder, uglier, more personal. The press is no longer just a watchdog. It's a pack of wolves in ink-stained waistcoats. You tried to warn them, tried to leave them a blueprint, but now you're just watching from the porch as the house creaks and sways under the weight of ambition. Meanwhile, back at Mount Vernon, you try, once again, to rebuild a routine. Early mornings, account books, letters to tenants. You oversee plans for crop rotation, coordinate repairs to the greenhouse roof, and complain regularly about the weather. The enslaved workers continue their toil under your watchful, silent gaze. You still haven't figured out how to untangle the knot completely, but the plans are in motion, your will is clear. After your death, they will be free. It's not justice, but it's more than most men in your position are willing to do. You don't host much anymore. The flood of guests has slowed, partly because of politics, partly because your health has grown more delicate. People still write, though. They always write. A few ask your opinion on this or that crisis. You rarely answer. You've said your piece. The rest is out of your hands. Martha keeps the house running. She always has. But now she keeps a closer eye on you too. You've lost weight. You tire more easily. Sometimes your memory slips. You'll forget where you set a letter down or whether you responded to someone. You mask it, of course. You're too proud not to. But she sees it. And she adjusts. Quietly. No fuss. Just fewer evening guests. More herbal teas. Longer silences after dinner. In the quiet moments you reflect. Not in a dramatic, journal entry sort of way. More like little mental sketches. You remember the frost on the tents at Valley Forge, the awkward ceremony of taking the presidential oath on the balcony in New York, the way Martha looked the first time you saw her surrounded by trunks of fine china and two rowdy children. You remember the battles you won and the ones you didn't. You think about Sally Fairfax, briefly, and then not. You also think about the country. You wonder if it will hold. If future presidents will follow your example or treat the office like a throne with better branding. You wonder if the Constitution will prove flexible enough to survive its own contradictions. You wonder what people will say about you 100 years from now, 1,000, then you shake it off. History can do what it wants. You've got seed orders to review and an estate inventory that still doesn't balance properly. On a strange and peaceful afternoon, you walk the grounds longer than usual. The wind cuts through your coat, but you don't mind. You watch the enslaved workers in the fields, children chasing chickens, a new calf wobbling through the mud. You make a mental note to inspect the paddock gate. It squeaks, probably needs oil. The dog trots beside you, silent and loyal. You pause near the river, where the wind brushes the surface into a shimmer. The same view you've had for decades. It never gets old. You take a breath. It's cool, sharp, real. And for a fleeting second, you let yourself feel done. You don't know it yet, but you've got about 2 weeks left. Just enough time to tie the loose ends, to review the will, to whisper a few more instructions, to be present one final time in the place you always belonged. The final days move quietly like a long exhale. It's December 17, and winter has arrived without ceremony, dusting Mount Vernon in a pale frost that crunches under the boots in the early morning. You wake before the sun, as always, and begin your rounds, first to the stables, then the barns, then the fields, your hands behind your back, your gait steady but slower than before. You note repairs needed on a fence, a shutter come loose, and you make a mental note to have the staff check on the grain stores. Nothing feels particularly urgent. Everything, at least outwardly, is in order. Your voice is rougher than usual that morning, thicker. You brush it off as a little cold in the throat, don't, and wave away Martha's concern when she tells you the weather's too raw for riding. You're not about to skip your routine over a bit of wind. So you mount your horse and ride out anyway, despite the rain, despite the sleet that blows sideways off the river. You spend hours in the saddle, inspecting the perimeter of the property like you always do, barely noticing how soaked your coat has become. That night your throat burns. It tightens. You feel it as you try to swallow, like someone drew a line of fire across your windpipe. Still you sleep, lightly, uncomfortably. At one point you wake gasping, briefly unable to catch your breath. You sit up, push the covers back, pace. Martha stirs. You assure her it's nothing. A chill. A minor ailment. Nothing worth worrying over. By morning it's not nothing. You can hardly speak. You signal for a servant to fetch the overseer. He sees you, pale and stiff, struggling to swallow, and immediately sends for the physicians. They begin arriving by midday, and what follows is the kind of medical horror story that only 18th century medicine can offer. They bleed you. First a pint, then more. In total, nearly 5 pints of your blood are drawn within 12 hours. They try vinegar gargles, poultices, blistering agents. You say little, not because you don't want to speak, but because you can't. Your throat is nearly closed. Your breathing comes in short, raspy gasps. You try to sit upright, which eases the pressure slightly. Someone props you with pillows. Martha stands nearby, calm, composed, holding your hand in hers. She will not leave the room. You understand at some level that this is the end. You don't fight it, not in panic, not with drama. You've lived long enough to know when the body gives up, and this body, yours, once so tall and commanding, once capable of riding for days and wielding a sword through snow and gunpowder, has finally had enough. You whisper a few instructions. Your voice is faint, shredded, but clear enough. You ask them to stop the treatments. They've done all they can. You say, "I die hard, but I am not afraid to go." There is no fear in you, only fatigue. You tell Martha to wait until the weather is warmer before placing you in the tomb. You ask her to stay warm, to keep the household running, to see the plans through. Then quietly, with dignity to the very end, you close your eyes. It is the evening of December the 14th, and your last breath leaves the room with no ceremony, just silence, just stillness. Martha doesn't weep, not openly. She turns from the bed and stands beside the hearth. Later, she will say simply, "I have no more trials to endure." A single sentence, no embellishment, but everyone in the room understands what she means. The news travels slowly at first. It has to. There's no telegraph, no flash alerts, no social media, just men on horseback carrying letters across muddy roads. By the time it reaches the cities, it's nearly Christmas, and the country is still digesting the news like a blow to the ribs. People who once criticised you openly now fall silent. Bells toll across the states. Mourning badges are sewn to coats. Public gatherings turn sombre. George Washington, father of his country, is gone. You'd probably be amused by how dramatic some of the eulogies become. Ministers declare you second only to the angels. Politicians who once grumbled about your aloofness now refer to you as the greatest man to ever live. Paintings are commissioned overnight. Poems are written, bad ones mostly. Lafayette weeps when the news reaches France. Even Britain, that old enemy, pauses to acknowledge the moment. Back at Mount Vernon, the funeral is private. Small. You wouldn't have wanted a spectacle, and Martha ensures it remains modest. There's a simple pine coffin, a few close friends, family. Enslaved workers line the road as the procession passes, many standing silently, unsure of what to feel. The air is still, the river quiet. The service is held in the family vault near the edge of the property, where the Potomac curves like a soft arm around your land. A few final prayers, a final silence. Then you're laid to rest, wrapped in cloth, sealed from the world you helped create. But you don't disappear. If anything, your absence makes you larger. Cities, states, counties, and streets rush to take your name. Statues rise. Schools adopt your profile as a seal of honour. Presidents after you are measured not by their accomplishments, but by how close they come to your example. And yet, with all that, amid the monuments and the currency and the schoolbook legends, somewhere your essence remains fixed to Mount Vernon. Visitors begin arriving not long after your death. They come by carriage and horseback to walk where you walked, to peer into your study, to see the desk where you wrote your last letters. They stand in front of the tomb and fall quiet. Some speak, some just look, but everyone feels something, a gravity, a presence, a whisper of old breath in old air. The house remains mostly as you left it. The keys to the study still hang on their hook. The china glimmers faintly in the cabinet. Your books, heavily annotated in the margins, still smell of ink and age. One or two servants claim they hear footsteps at night, slow and steady on the floorboards upstairs. The breeze sometimes shifts the drapes as if someone just passed by. It becomes a kind of soft legend. Washington never really left. In truth, you didn't want to be immortal. You didn't build statues. You didn't carve your name into anything taller than a boundary stone. You believed that power should end, that leaders should step aside when the job was done. You knew the danger of men who refused to let go. And yet here you are, etched into memory, into coins, into myth. It wasn't your goal, but maybe it was inevitable. Because you were never the loudest, never the flashiest. You didn't chase greatness. You just showed up, day after day, frost or sun, battlefield or farmhouse, with sleeves rolled up and eyes steady, carrying a new nation on your back, hoping it would someday stand on its own. And now that you've left it, it just might. By now, your body has long since turned to dust, your bones settled quietly in the hillside tomb overlooking the Potomac. The world has moved on, or at least it pretends to, but your name never really steps off the stage. Generations come and go, and still they reach for you. Still they summon your silhouette like a kind of secular saint, trying to borrow your dignity for whatever chaos they're currently enduring. In life, you were cautious with your words. In death, your silence is thunderous. Politicians quote you like scripture. Historians argue over what you must have meant. Schoolchildren trace your story through colouring books and textbook glossaries, and all the while your legacy stretches, shifts, cracks a little around the edges, but holds. Mount Vernon becomes more than a home. It becomes a shrine. In 1853, it's saved from decay not by the government, but by a group of determined women, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, who raise money, buy the property, and preserve it inch by inch. You'd probably admire that. Not just the dedication, but the quiet efficiency. They restore the house, the grounds, the furniture, even your bedroom, down to the washstand and shaving mirror. No flashy signage, just care, a kind of living respect. They open it to the public and the visitors come. Thousands at first, then tens of thousands, then millions. They walk the gravel paths you once walked, peer into the study where you wrote your letters, stand beneath your portrait. Some are reverent, and some are bored, but all of them feel something. The weight of time, maybe. Or just the eerie sense that greatness once lived here and maybe hasn't entirely left. Even the tomb becomes a destination. In 1831, your remains are moved to a new vault nearby, sturdier, less prone to desecration, and more fitting for a national figure. Some people want your body entombed in the Capitol in a monument in marble, but your will was clear. You asked to stay at Mount Vernon, and so here you remain, tucked into a red brick vault flanked by columns, surrounded by holly trees facing the water. Tour guides whisper stories as they lead people down the shaded path. Some talk about the way your favourite mule, Royal Gift, once wandered the property. Others retell the cherry tree myth with a wink, then follow up with the truth, because everyone loves a bedtime story, even when it's a lie. Inside the tomb, your name is carved in stone, plain, direct, no frills, just the facts. George Washington, born February 28, 1732, died December 14, 1799. There's no quote, no grand final words, just dates and silence, and in some strange way, that simplicity is what endures. You didn't become a legend by chasing immortality. You became a legend by walking away when you could have stayed. Twice. You understood the delicate balance between holding power and knowing when to let go. You understood that greatness isn't always loud, it's sometimes just steady. Present, unshakable. That's the version of you people cling to, the calm in the storm. The man who knew when enough was enough. In a country that often runs at full volume, you remain the ghost of restraint. Of course the truth is messier. You weren't perfect. You were a slaveholder, a cautious reformer, a reluctant political figure. You struggled with the same contradictions the country still wrestles with: freedom and inequality, ambitions and humility, tradition and change. You wrote your own rules, and yet sometimes let the rules of your era go unchallenged. And yet, through it all, you carried the weight. You didn't have to. No one made you lead, no one made you step down, but you did both. When the Republic was barely a concept, you helped shape it into something tangible. When others would have held on to power, you handed it back like a borrowed coat. And when you finally laid down your sword, it stayed down. That's the story people remember. And for good reason. But there's another version of you, the one the monuments often forget. Not the general, not the president, just George. George who obsessed over fences and turnips. George who struggled to raise wayward stepchildren. George who hated public speaking and only smiled when he really meant it. George who built a home out of the wilderness and through sheer will turned it into something that could outlast him. George who worried constantly about legacy but didn't live to see how strangely right and wrong he was about his own. And maybe that's the version most worth remembering, because it means you weren't born a statue. You were made of nerves, sweat, bad handwriting, questionable dental materials, and incredibly high expectations. You failed sometimes, you doubted often, but you kept showing up. You kept writing letters, kept riding the fields, kept trying to be the man the moment required, even when you weren't sure you could. In that way, you weren't superhuman at all. You were just stubborn enough to try. And in the end, maybe that's what made you extraordinary. So now we've walked the grounds, peeked inside your library, tiptoed through your study. We've watched you raise stepkids who didn't listen, manage a nation that barely knew itself and endure powdered wigs, political tantrums and the world's least comfortable dentures. We've seen you hesitate, evolve, misstep and try again. And now, George, we're letting you rest. You didn't ask to be worshipped, you asked for recency, order. Enough distance from chaos to plant your peas in peace. But instead you became a symbol, a compass, a carved face staring out from every wallet and monument pedestal. They named cities after you, schools, warships, a whole state. They even made your birthday a sale event, presumably not what you had in mind when you stepped down from office with carefully measured dignity. But somewhere in the middle of the statues and solemn speeches, the real you still flickers, quietly, stubbornly, in candlelit corridors and handwritten ledgers. A man who loved structure, mistrusted drama, and hated being the centre of attention, but ended up there anyway. A man who wanted to go home but kept being called back. A man who made time each day to walk the fields because it reminded him of what mattered. So now, as you finally fade from view, imagine yourself back there. A soft wind over the Potomac, the gentle clip of hooves on wet grass, your house just behind you, windows glowing warm. There's no parade, no orchestra, just the calm you spent your whole life chasing. And for you, listening, still awake somehow, maybe take that with you tonight. That quiet strength, that calm persistence, the knowledge that greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just gets up early, keeps its appointments, and does the work with clean hands and a tucked-in shirt. Now, dim the lights just a little more, pull the blanket to your chin, and let everything else wait.